What if the difference between understanding something and merely memorizing it isn't about how smart you are, but about how willing you are to look foolish? There's a particular way of thinking that separates those who truly grasp ideas from those who just collect facts like stamps in an album. And the strange thing is, most people spend their entire lives avoiding this way of thinking because it feels uncomfortable, embarrassing even. They choose the comfort of appearing knowledgeable over the discomfort of actually becoming knowledgeable. The average person walks through life, accumulating information the way a magpie collects shiny objects. They read a book, nod along, maybe underline a few sentences, and then move on, feeling satisfied. They attend a lecture, take notes in neat columns, and file those notes away. They study for an exam by reading the same pages over and over until the words become familiar patterns. And they wonder why, months later, nothing remains. Why the ideas that seemed so clear have evaporated like morning fog. Here's what happens in that common approach. The brain treats understanding like a spectator sport. Information comes in, gets sorted into existing mental categories, and sits there waiting to be recalled. It's passive, it's safe, and it's almost completely useless for genuine learning. When someone reads a textbook chapter and thinks they understand it because the sentences made sense as their eyes passed over them, they've confused familiarity with comprehension. The words felt comfortable because they fit into vague notions already in the mind. But ask them to explain the concept to someone else, or to apply it to a new situation, and watch the confidence crumble. The thinking pattern that changes everything starts with a simple question. Can you explain this to someone who knows nothing about it? Not, can you repeat the explanation you just heard? Not, can you parrot back the author's words? But can you, using your own understanding, reconstruct the idea from the ground up? This is where most people discover they've been fooling themselves. Let's say you've just finished reading a chapter about how engines work. You closed the book feeling pretty good. The diagrams made sense. The descriptions were clear. But now, imagine someone walks into the room and asks you to explain it to them without looking at the book. Suddenly, gaps appear everywhere. Wait, how exactly does the piston connect to the crankshaft? What was the sequence of events in the combustion cycle again? You thought you understood, but you were really just following someone else's understanding. The way you might follow a guided tour through a museum. You saw everything, but you couldn't lead the tour yourself. This reveals the first principle. Understanding lives in reconstruction, not recognition. When you can rebuild an idea using only what's in your head, when you can draw the diagram from memory or walk through the logic step by step without notes, that's when you actually possess the knowledge. Everything else is borrowed clothing that you're trying to pass off as your own. But here's where it gets uncomfortable. To test whether you can reconstruct something, you have to try. And trying means risking failure. It means sitting with a blank piece of paper and attempting to draw that engine diagram, knowing you might get it wrong. It means explaining the concept out loud to an imaginary student, stumbling over the parts you don't really understand. Most people avoid this because watching yourself fail, even in private, triggers something primal. The brain recoils from it. So instead, they reread the chapter. They review their notes. They do anything except confront the actual gaps in their understanding. The second principle follows naturally. Confusion is the compass. When you start trying to explain something and feel that fog of uncertainty rolling in, when you reach for a concept and can't quite grasp it, that's not a sign you're doing it wrong. That's the signal you've found where the real learning needs to happen. The average person feels that confusion and backs away, returns to the comfortable feeling of reading words that make sense. But that confusion is marking the exact location where understanding hasn't yet formed. Think about what happens when someone learns to solve a type of mathematical problem. They watch the teacher do one on the blackboard. It looks straightforward. Then they try one themselves and get stuck immediately. The natural response is frustration, maybe even panic. But that moment of being stuck is the moment when learning can actually occur. Not before, when everything looked easy from the audience. Not after, when they've memorized the steps. Right there, in the middle of confusion, when the mind is wrestling with something it doesn't yet grasp. The difference is whether you see that confusion as failure or as information. If it's failure, you avoid it. If it's information, you lean into it. You ask, what exactly am I confused about? Is it this concept or that one? Where does my understanding break down? And then you go back to that specific thing, not to reread everything, but to rebuild your understanding of that particular piece. Here's the third principle, and it's perhaps the most counterintuitive. You must be willing to sound stupid to yourself. When you're trying to explain something, you're learning, and you hear yourself saying things that sound vague or circular or just plain wrong, the instinct is to stop, to feel embarrassed, even though you're alone, to think, this is pointless, I don't know what I'm talking about. But that voice of yourself sounding uncertain, struggling for words, making mistakes in your reasoning, that's the sound of learning happening in real time. Compare two students. The first reads the chapter on thermodynamics, nods along, highlights key sentences, and feels satisfied. The second reads the same chapter, then closes the book and tries to explain the concept of entropy to an empty chair. They stumble. They backtrack. They realize they're using words without really knowing what they mean. So they open the book again. But this time, they're not reading to feel comfortable. They're reading to answer specific questions that emerged from their failed explanation. Then they try again and again. After an hour, the first student has read the chapter 3 times and feels confident. The second student has only gone through it once and a half, but has tried to explain it 5 times, each attempt getting clearer. 6 months later, ask them both about entropy. The first student will give you fragments of sentences they once highlighted. The second will be able to have a conversation about it. This is because the brain doesn't store information the way a filing cabinet stores papers. It stores it as connections, as pathways. Reading creates weak pathways. Recognizing information when you see it again strengthens those pathways slightly. But actively reconstructing information, forcing the brain to pull together pieces and build the idea fresh, that creates highways. The more times you rebuild something in your mind, the stronger those connections become. Eventually, the knowledge isn't something you have to retrieve. It's something you can simply use, like a language you speak fluently, rather than translate word by word. Now, there's a deeper mechanism at work here that explains why this method is so powerful. The brain is constantly making predictions about what comes next. When you read a sentence, your brain is predicting the next word before you see it. When you watch a demonstration, your brain is predicting the next step. These predictions happen unconsciously, automatically. And here's the key: learning happens most efficiently when predictions are wrong. If you're just reading and everything confirms what you expected, minimal learning occurs. The brain says, yes, this fits what I already know, and moves on. But when you try to explain something and discover you predicted wrong, you thought this concept led to that conclusion, but it doesn't. You thought you understood this relationship, but you don't. That's when the brain pays attention. That's when it actually rewrites the mental model. This is why testing yourself is so much more effective than reviewing. Not because tests are magical, but because tests force predictions. You have to predict the answer before you see it. You have to commit to what you think is true. And when you're wrong, the gap between what you predicted and what's actually correct creates the conditions for genuine learning. Reviewing just shows you things you already saw. Testing shows you where your understanding diverges from reality. Let's bring this into practical territory. Say you're learning about electrical circuits. The textbook shows you how current flows, how resistance works, what happens when you add components in series versus parallel. You read it carefully. Now, here's what separates two approaches. The common approach: you read the section on parallel circuits. It makes sense. You look at the diagrams, they're clear. You move on to the next section, feeling you've learned it. A week later, someone asks you why adding resistors in parallel decreases total resistance, and you know you read about this, but the explanation won't come. You remember it had something to do with pathways, but the details are fog. The uncommon approach: you read about parallel circuits. Then you close the book and draw a parallel circuit from memory. Can you? Maybe partially. You try to explain out loud why the total resistance decreases. You start with, because there are more paths, but then you realize you're just using words. What does more paths actually mean for the electrons? You're not sure. So you open the book again, but now you're not reading passively. You're reading to understand this specific thing about paths and resistance. You find it. It clicks. You close the book again and try the explanation once more. This time you get further. You draw the diagram again, this time adding the details of current division. Each time you try and fail, you identify exactly what you don't understand. Each time you return to the material, you're targeting those specific gaps. After several cycles of this, something changes. The concept isn't something you know in the sense of having read it. It's something you can think with. When you encounter a new circuit problem, you don't have to recall what the book said. You can reason through it using the understanding you've built. This takes longer in the moment. That's why most people don't do it. They can read a chapter in 30 minutes, and that feels productive. Trying to explain it to themselves, stumbling, going back, trying again, that might take an hour or more for the same material. But here's what they miss. The 30-minute reading needs to be repeated multiple times for anything to stick, and even then, it often doesn't. The hour of active reconstruction creates understanding that lasts. You spend more time once, but you don't have to keep relearning the same thing. There's also a social dimension to this that most people overlook. We're terrified of looking stupid in front of others, so we wait until we're sure we understand something before we try to explain it. But this is backwards. Explaining something to another person while you're still figuring it out is one of the most powerful learning tools available. Not explaining it perfectly, explaining it messily, with gaps, with mistakes, while the other person asks questions that expose what you don't understand yet. Picture two people working through a challenging book together. They don't take turns presenting polished summaries of what they've read. Instead, they read a section, then immediately start talking about it, trying to make sense of it together. Wait, I don't understand why that follows from what was said before. Let me try to put this in different words and you tell me if it makes sense. They're not afraid to sound confused because they're stick, both confused. And through the process of articulating their confusion, asking questions, challenging each other's half-formed explanations, they build understanding together in a way neither could alone. This is the opposite of how most studying happens, which is solitary, silent, and focused on feeling certain rather than exploring uncertainty. People study alone because they don't want others to see them struggle. They review silently because speaking feels silly. They seek the feeling of certainty because uncertainty is uncomfortable, and in doing so, they avoid the very conditions that create real learning. Here's what this all points to. The quality of your understanding is directly proportional to your willingness to expose its weaknesses. If you only engage with material in ways that let you maintain the feeling of comprehension, you'll never develop genuine comprehension. You have to be willing to test yourself when you're likely to fail, to explain things when your explanation will be clumsy, to ask questions that reveal what you don't know. This feels inefficient because it involves so much stumbling and backtracking. But it's the only way to build knowledge that lasts, an understanding that's truly yours. The path to average thinking is paved with comfortable feelings of understanding. You read, you nod, you highlight, you feel like you're learning. And maybe you are. In the weakest sense, you're becoming familiar with ideas. But familiarity isn't understanding. Understanding is what happens when you've struggled with an idea enough times that it becomes part of how you think, not just something you think about. So here's the challenge. Take whatever you're trying to learn right now and explain it. Not to me, not to anyone in particular. Just explain it out loud, or write it out on paper, as if you were teaching it to someone who knows nothing about the subject. Don't look at your notes. Don't peek at the book. Just try. And when you get stuck, not if, when, don't judge yourself for it. That's the point. The sticking point is the learning point. That's where you need to direct your attention, where you need to go back to the source material, not to reread everything, but to understand that specific thing you couldn't explain. Do this enough times, and something remarkable happens. You stop being a passive receiver of information and become an active builder of understanding. The difference isn't subtle. It's the difference between someone who's read about swimming and someone who can swim, between someone who's studied maps of a city and someone who knows their way around. between appearing knowledgeable and being capable of thought. The truth is, most people will never think this way because it requires abandoning the comfort of feeling smart for the discomfort of discovering you're not as smart as you thought, at least not yet. But for those willing to look foolish to themselves, willing to expose the gaps in their understanding, willing to rebuild ideas rather than just recognize them, thinking becomes something else entirely, not a performance of intelligence, but an actual tool for understanding the world. That's the choice, really. Stay comfortable with borrowed understanding, or get uncomfortable building your own. The first keeps you average. The second changes everything.
People think they understand gravity, but that feeling comes from repetition, not from knowledge. You grow up dropping things, cups, stones, books. They fall every time. After enough years, your mind stops asking questions. Gravity becomes background noise. It feels as obvious as the floor. That confidence is the problem. Because the moment you try to say what gravity does, in a way that lets you predict something new, the easy words stop working. So let's do only what works. Let's describe what happens, carefully, one step at a time, and refuse to guess ahead. Take an object, any object. Hold it still, then let go. It begins to move. Not instantly fast. It starts slow, then faster, then faster. That change in motion happens smoothly. Now repeat the experiment with a different object, different size, different material, different weight in your hand. Let go again. The motion changes in exactly the same way. Not almost, not approximately, the same. Now wait, that already contradicts something most people believe. If you ask someone before the experiment, they expect the heavier thing to fall faster. They do not say it out loud anymore, but their body believes it. Their muscles believe it. Their language still carries it, but the experiment refuses. So we write down what we actually see. Every object, when released near Earth, changes its motion in the same way. That statement is precise. It is not a story. It is not an explanation. It is a fact. Now remove the distractions. Air gets in the way. Feathers flutter. Paper drifts. That has nothing to do with gravity. That is the air pushing back. So we remove the air. Drop objects in a vacuum. Now everything behaves the same way again. So gravity does not depend on shape. It does not depend on material. It does not depend on how heavy the object feels. Whatever gravity is doing, it produces the same change in motion for all objects. Now stop and notice how strange that is. Because every other influence we know fails this test. Push two objects with the same shove. The lighter one responds more. Heat two objects with the same flame. They warm differently. Charge two objects. They behave differently depending on what they are. Gravity does not care. That is not a metaphor. That is an experimental distinction. Now, people usually say, gravity pulls things down. That sounds fine until you ask a technical question. Pulls toward where? If gravity pulled down, then down would mean the same direction everywhere. But it does not. People on opposite sides of Earth both fall toward the ground beneath them. Their down directions point toward each other. So gravity is not down, it is inward. Toward what? Toward Earth's mass. That sounds better, but it is still sloppy. Because if mass causes gravity, then more mass should mean a stronger effect on falling speed. But falling speed does not change. So we must separate two ideas that are easy to confuse. First, how strongly gravity acts on an object. Second, how strongly the object resists changes in motion. These are different roles. They do not have to match. But experimentally, they match exactly. Every test ever done shows that the factor that controls how strongly gravity acts is the same factor that controls resistance to motion change. Because they match, they cancel. That cancellation is why all objects fall the same way. We do not explain this cancellation. We use it. Now let's move away from falling objects and make the situation worse. Look at the moon. The moon does not fall straight down. It keeps circling. At first glance, that seems like a different problem. But try this procedure. Imagine the moon with no sideways motion at all. None. Just release it. It falls straight toward Earth. Now give it a little sideways motion. It still falls inward, but now it misses Earth. Give it more sideways motion. It keeps missing. There is no moment where gravity turns off. There is no balance point. The moon is falling the entire time. An orbit is not a suspension. It is continuous falling combined with sideways motion. That is not an interpretation. You can calculate it. You can reproduce it with any object given enough sideways speed. Now pause again. The same rule explains the falling cup and the circling moon without modification. That is already a success. But now comes the next question that ruins comfort. If gravity produces the same change in motion for all objects, why does distance matter? The moon does not fall as fast as the cup, so gravity weakens with distance. How? You measure it. You track motion. You infer how fast motion changes at different distances. You find that the effect decreases in a very specific way as distance increases. Not because we prefer that way, because measurements force it. Now here is the key restraint. We do not say gravity knows distance. We do not say gravity reaches out. We do not say gravity spreads. Those words suggest mechanisms we do not observe. All we say is this. Given a mass arrangement, there is a rule that tells you how motion changes at each place. That rule works. It predicts falling objects. It predicts orbits. It predicts tides. It predicts the timing of motion. That is gravity at this level. No story added. Now, one more reversal before stopping. When you stand still on the ground, you feel weight. When you fall freely, you feel nothing. That sounds backward until you check what is happening. Standing still requires the ground to continually change your motion. Falling does not. So gravity is not what you feel when you fall. You feel gravity when something prevents you from falling. That statement is not abstract. It is operational. You can test it. Stand on a scale. It reads weight. Remove the support. The reading vanishes. Nothing about gravity changed. Only the constraint did. So gravity describes natural motion when no other influence interferes. Now we pick up exactly where the trouble starts. We already know gravity gives the same change in motion to every object at the same place. That part is settled by experiment. We do not argue it anymore. But the effect is not the same everywhere. So now we ask a narrower question. If gravity changes motion, how does that change depend on where you are, not why? How? So we do not imagine we measure. You track objects that fall from different heights. You time them. You compare. You do the same thing with objects that move sideways, like projectiles. You do it again with the moon, and again with planets. Every time you extract the same quantity, how fast motion changes at a given distance from Earth. You make a table. Distance from Earth, change in motion. Distance larger, change smaller. Now wait, this is important. The decrease is not arbitrary. It is not linear. It is not random. It follows a strict rule. If you double the distance from Earth's center, the effect becomes 4 times weaker. If you triple the distance, it becomes 9 times weaker. That rule shows up everywhere gravity is measured. Now, we do not say why that rule exists yet. We only accept that it is there because it predicts motion correctly. This is where people usually jump too fast and say inverse square law, as if the name explains it. The name explains nothing. It just labels the behavior. So let's build it instead. Imagine you surround Earth with an imaginary shell at some distance. On that shell, you measure how much gravity affects motion. Now imagine a larger shell, farther out. The same Earth is responsible for both effects. Nothing new is added. But the larger shell has more area. So whatever influence is associated with Earth is now spread across a larger region. The same total effect distributed more thinly. That procedure leads exactly to the distance rule we measure. This is not a metaphor. It is a counting argument. If you accept space as three-dimensional, this rule follows. And here is the restraint. We do not say gravity spreads. We do not say gravity flows. We say only this: the numerical rule that fits all measurements behaves this way with distance. Now we test it. We use it to predict the moon's motion. We calculate how much the moon's motion should change if the same rule applies far away. It matches. We use the same rule for planets. It matches again. No adjustment, no extra terms. So now gravity does two things at once. It gives the same change in motion to all objects at the same place, and it changes with distance in a precise, predictable way. That already puts gravity in a special category. But now we push further. If Earth causes gravity, then smaller masses should cause weaker effects. So we ask, can we detect gravity from something other than Earth? This is not easy. The effect is weak, but it can be done. You take large masses. You suspend small test objects nearby. You isolate everything from vibration. You remove air motion. You wait. The test objects move. Not much, but measurably. They accelerate toward the large masses. So gravity is not exclusive to Earth. Every mass contributes. Again, not a story, an observation. Now we combine facts. Every mass affects motion. The effect weakens with distance. The effect treats all test objects the same. From this, we can write a rule that predicts the change in motion given a distribution of mass. This rule does not tell us what gravity is. It tells us what happens. And now comes a subtle but important point. If every mass affects motion, then every object both falls and causes falling. The cup falls toward Earth. Earth falls toward the cup. You do not notice the second part because Earth is hard to move, but it happens. So gravity is mutual. That is not a philosophical statement. It is required for momentum to be conserved. If Earth did not respond at all, motion accounting would fail. Now test that idea. In a system with two similar masses, both move toward each other. In a system with a small mass and a large one, both move, but the smaller one moves more. The same rule predicts both. So gravity does not single out one object as active and the other as passive. Now notice what we still have not said. We have not said gravity pushes. We have not said gravity pulls. We have not said gravity travels. We only describe changes in motion that can be calculated. Now here is where intuition really starts to fail. If gravity depends on distance, and distance depends on motion, then motion affects gravity's effect. That means gravity and motion are linked in a way that force laws usually are not. So let's do a clean experiment. You throw an object sideways. Gravity changes its vertical motion, but not its sideways motion. At least that is what basic measurement says. But now increase the sideways speed. Make it very large. The path curves differently. Eventually, the object no longer hits the ground. It circles. Gravity has not changed. The object's motion has. So gravity does not dictate a path. It dictates how motion changes. That distinction matters. Because once you frame gravity as a rule for how motion changes rather than a push, a lot of confusion disappears. We are not saying what gravity does to objects. We are saying how objects move when gravity is the only influence. That is an operational statement. You can remove all other influences and test it. Now we stop here deliberately, because the next step requires changing how we think about straight motion itself. And if we rush into that too soon, it sounds like wordplay. So we stop with this inventory. Gravity gives the same change in motion to all objects at the same place. It weakens with distance in a precise way. Every mass contributes. Motion under gravity is predictable without knowing what gravity is. That is all we have earned so far. Now we reach the point where the usual force picture starts to crack. Up to now, we have treated gravity as a rule that tells you how motion changes when nothing else interferes. That works for falling objects. It works for orbits. It works for anything you can drop, throw, or track. But there is a deeper test. We ask whether gravity can be removed. Not reduced, not weakened, removed. So we try the cleanest possible experiment. You build a closed box, thick walls, no windows, nothing to look out of. Inside the box you place an object. You release it. It falls. Now you do something else. You put the same box far from Earth. No nearby masses. No measurable gravity at all. You attach a rocket to the box. You fire the rocket so the box accelerates. You release the object again. It falls. Now wait. Falls relative to what? Relative to the box. In both cases, the object moves the same way with respect to the walls of the box. You measure times. You measure distances. You compare motions. You cannot tell which situation you are in. That is not a thought game. It is a rule you can test. If gravity acted differently from acceleration, the motions would differ. They do not. So we arrive at a statement that is almost uncomfortable. Being in a gravitational field and being in an accelerating system produce the same local effects. Not approximately, exactly, as far as experiments can tell. This is not a belief. It is forced by observation. Now slow down. This is delicate. We are not saying gravity is acceleration. We are saying that locally, meaning in a small enough region, there is no experiment that can tell them apart. So any explanation of gravity that depends on a special gravitational push immediately runs into trouble, because acceleration without gravity produces the same effects. Now test this idea again. Inside the accelerating box, objects fall, liquids form surfaces, light travels in straight lines relative to the box. No, wait, that is where it gets interesting. You send a beam of light across the box, sideways. While the light travels, the box accelerates upward. So by the time the light reaches the other wall, the wall has moved. The light hits lower than where it started. So inside the accelerating box, light appears to bend. Now return to the first situation, the box sitting on Earth. If the two situations are indistinguishable, then light must also bend in a gravitational field. That is not optional, that is forced. So now we have a prediction. Light, even though it has no mass in the usual sense, must have its motion affected by gravity. We can test this. We look at light from distant stars as it passes near a massive body. We measure where it appears. It is displaced. The amount matches the prediction. Now pause again. We did not assume gravity pulls on light. We did not add a new rule. We took one experimentally unavoidable statement. Acceleration and gravity are locally indistinguishable, and followed it to a consequence. That consequence is correct. Now look at what just happened to the force picture. A force usually acts on something that resists it. Light does not resist changes in motion the way objects with mass do, yet its path is affected. So gravity cannot be acting like an ordinary force. It cannot be pushing. It cannot be tugging. It is doing something else. But before saying what that something else is, we do another experiment. Inside the falling box, not the accelerating one, the freely falling one, you release objects. They float. They do not fall toward the floor. They stay where they are. Now, wait, that means something important. Inside a freely falling system, gravity disappears. Not approximately, exactly. That is not poetry, that is operational. You can test it. Drop the box, release objects, measure their motion relative to the box. They do not accelerate. So gravity is present when objects are prevented from following their natural motion. Gravity is absent when objects are allowed to follow it. This is the same reversal we noticed earlier with weight. Now we push it further. If gravity vanishes in free fall, then gravity is not something added to motion. It is something that shows up when motion is constrained. That is a dangerous sentence, so let me clean it. We are not saying gravity turns off. We are saying the effects attributed to gravity can be removed by choosing a freely falling frame. That is an experimental fact. Now we ask the next hard question. If gravity can be removed locally by changing motion, then gravity is not a property of objects. It is a property of how motion is described. That sounds abstract, so let's anchor it. Straight motion is defined as motion that requires no intervention. Inside the falling box, objects move straight. Outside the box, standing on the ground, the same motion looks curved. So what counts as straight depends on the situation. and that dependence is controlled by mass distribution. Now notice how carefully we are moving. We have not said anything about space being bent. We have not drawn pictures. We have only said this: the rule that tells you which motions require no intervention depends on where mass is. That is a rule you can use. Given mass arrangement, you can calculate which paths count as natural. And once you know that, everything else follows. Objects follow those paths. Light follows those paths. Clocks follow those paths. Now we stop again, because from here on, the language becomes dangerous if used too early. So we inventory what is now forced on us. Gravity is indistinguishable from acceleration in small regions. Light's motion is affected by gravity. Gravity can be removed locally by free fall. What counts as straight motion depends on mass. None of that is interpretation. All of it is experimental or logical consequence. Now we have to be extremely careful, because this is the place where people usually stop doing physics and start telling stories. So we will not tell stories, we will build rules. Up to now, everything we have said can be checked with falling boxes, clocks, light beams, and motion measurements. No pictures were required, just procedures. Now we ask the next necessary question. If gravity can be removed locally by free fall, but not globally, then what remains? Something must still distinguish one place from another. Otherwise, nothing would ever curve, and the moon would not orbit. So the effect of gravity is not gone. It is just hidden locally. So where does it show up? It shows up when you compare motion in different places. That comparison is unavoidable. Here is the experiment. You take two objects. You place them some distance apart. You release both in free fall. Locally, near each object, everything looks ordinary. No gravity, no acceleration. But now you compare their motion. Do they remain the same distance apart? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Near Earth, two objects dropped side by side slowly move closer together as they fall. That is measurable. They are both falling freely, and yet their separation changes. So gravity has not vanished. It has changed form. Instead of showing up as a force on each object, it shows up as a change in how nearby motions compare. That is not interpretation, that is observation. So now we have to describe gravity in a new way, not as a force acting on objects, but as a rule governing how families of nearby motions evolve relative to one another. This is already enough to abandon the force picture. Because forces act on single objects, what we are now seeing is an effect that shows up only when you compare multiple objects. So gravity is about relationships between motions. Now we tighten it. If you want to describe motion without gravity, you say, objects move in straight lines unless acted on. That definition of straight is operational. You check whether motion requires intervention. Now, in the presence of gravity, that definition breaks. An object that is falling freely requires no intervention, yet its path looks curved when compared to distant reference points. So either the object is not moving straight, or our definition of straight is incomplete. The experiments force the second option. So we refine the rule. Straight motion means motion that requires no local intervention. That is all. Once you adopt that definition, falling objects move straight. Light moves straight. Anything not constrained moves straight. So where does curvature come from? From comparison across space. You compare two locally straight motions in different places, and they do not align. That mismatch is gravity. Now pause. Notice what we have done without saying it out loud. We have moved gravity out of objects and into the structure that compares motion across space and time. But we are still not allowed to say anything vague, so we give ourselves a task. Given a distribution of mass, we want a rule that tells us how locally straight motions compare across space. That rule must predict falling objects, orbits, light, bending, clock, rates, tidal effects, and it must reduce to ordinary motion when gravity is absent. That is a tall order, but it can be done. Now here is the key constraint. The rule cannot depend on what object you use to probe it, because all objects fall the same way. So the rule must depend only on position and motion, not on mass or composition. That immediately rules out many possible descriptions. Now we search for something that satisfies all constraints. We need a mathematical structure that tells you what straight motion means locally, lets straightness vary from place to place, depends only on mass distribution, applies equally to all objects, and light. There is only one known structure that does this cleanly. It is a rule that assigns relationships between nearby positions and times. Once those relationships are specified, straight motion is determined. No force is required, no extra assumptions. Now I will say the dangerous sentence, but only after earning it. Gravity is not something that happens in space and time. It is something that determines how space and time relate motion. That sentence sounds abstract, so let me translate it back into procedure. Given mass distribution, you compute certain relationships between nearby positions and times. From those relationships, you calculate which motions require no intervention. Those motions are what objects follow when left alone. That is gravity. Now test it. You compute those relationships near Earth. You calculate natural paths. They curve inward. You compute them far away. They straighten. You compute them near massive bodies. Light paths curve. You compute clock behavior. Clocks run at different rates in different places. Those are not added effects. They fall out of the same rule. Now pause again. Notice how little we assumed. We did not assume gravity pulls. We did not assume gravity propagates. We did not assume gravity prefers mass. We assumed only what experiments forced: local equivalence of gravity and acceleration, universality of free fall, predictability of motion. Everything else follows. Now here is the last important check before we move on. If this description is correct, then energy and motion accounting must still work. Objects must exchange motion consistently. No energy should appear or vanish. That is not automatic, but when the calculations are done carefully, accounting works. Momentum is conserved. Energy is conserved in the proper sense. So the new description does not break older successes. It contains them. Now we stop again, because the final step is to confront what this description does not tell us, and that matters just as much. Up to now, we have built gravity only from things we are forced to accept. We did not guess what gravity is made of. We did not invent pictures. We did not add causes that cannot be tested. We asked only this: given how motion behaves, what rule predicts it? And we found such a rule. It tells us how to calculate motion when mass is present. It tells us how clocks behave. It tells us how light travels. It tells us how objects fall, orbit, and separate. It does all of that correctly. Now we ask the final question. Does this rule explain gravity? The answer is no. And that is not a failure. That is a fact. Because explanation in the usual sense means reducing one thing to something more familiar. And nothing underneath this rule is more familiar. You can ask what causes gravity, but the question stops being productive. Because gravity is not sitting on top of something simpler, it is already at the bottom of the ladder, as far as we can tell. Now let's be precise about what we mean. We have a rule that takes mass distribution as input and gives motion as output. We do not know why that rule is the rule. We do not know why mass affects motion this way and not another way. We do not know why the cancellation between gravitational action and resistance to motion is exact. We do not know why light follows the same natural paths as objects. Those are not missing pieces of calculation. They are missing pieces of explanation, and physics is honest about that. Now, check something important. Despite not knowing why the rule is what it is, we can use it. We can predict motion with extreme accuracy. We can send objects around Earth and bring them back. We can predict clock differences. We can correct navigation systems. We can predict gravitational waves and detect them. All of that works. So gravity as a theory is complete in one sense and incomplete in another. Complete for prediction, incomplete for explanation. Now notice something subtle. People often feel uneasy about this and try to repair it by adding stories. They say space is curved like a surface. They say mass tells space how to bend. They draw diagrams. Those pictures are not wrong, but they are not the theory. They are translation aids. If you take them too seriously, they mislead you. Because space is not a rubber sheet, and mass does not push on it. The actual theory is a calculation procedure. Given mass distribution, compute certain quantities. From those quantities, compute motion. That is all. Now, one last experimental check. If gravity were an ordinary force, then it should combine with other forces in the same way. But it does not. Gravity affects everything, even energy stored in motion itself. Light bends. Time behaves differently. That already tells you gravity does not sit alongside other forces. It reorganizes the stage on which they act. But, and this is important, that does not mean gravity explains the others. It coexists with them. And here is the remaining problem. When we try to combine gravity with the rules that govern very small systems, things stop working cleanly. Calculations blow up. Predictions fail. Not because gravity is vague, but because our methods clash. So gravity stands in an odd position. It is extremely precise. It is extremely reliable. And it refuses to fit neatly with everything else. That is not something to fix with words. It is something to fix with better rules or to accept as a boundary. Now let me end by undoing one last misunderstanding. People think gravity is mysterious because it is hard to imagine. That is not the problem. Electricity is hard to imagine too. The difference is this. For electricity, we can imagine causes beneath the rule. For gravity, every attempt to do that collapses back into the same rule. So the correct attitude is not comfort, it is discipline. We do not pretend to know more than we do. We do not replace rules with pictures. We use the rule. We test the rule. We respect where it stops answering questions. That is not giving up. That is how physics stays honest, and that is gravity as far as we can take it without lying.
The word law sounds confident, final, as if reality signed a contract and agreed to follow it forever. In physics, the word is used with that same seriousness, but without any assumption of authority behind it. No one enforces a physical law. Nothing checks compliance. There are no penalties handed down for violation. The law holds anyway. That alone deserves attention. There is no built-in requirement that the universe behave consistently. Nothing demands that the same setup, repeated at different times or places, must lead to the same outcome, and yet it does, with reliability strong enough that entire technologies, predictions, and measurements depend on it without hesitation. A physical law is not a command given to nature. It is a regularity discovered through repeated failure to find exceptions. Drop an object, heat a metal, charge a capacitor, send light through glass, change the location, the time, the observer, the surrounding conditions. The relationship repeats, not approximately, not most of the time. The same connection appears again and again. That repetition is the strange part. Physical laws do not explain why the universe behaves this way. They describe how reliably it behaves this way. Take gravity. Objects accelerate downward at a predictable rate near Earth. The law does not instruct the object to fall. It states that whenever mass and distance appear in that arrangement, the same outcome follows. The law is a compressed summary of behavior written after observation. Physics does not invent laws and impose them on reality. Physics notices that reality refuses to vary in certain ways. A law is what remains when preference, intention, and opinion are removed, leaving only what repeats no matter who checks. This leads to a consequence people often overlook. If something violates a physical law, it does not qualify as rare or unusual. It simply never appears in experiments, regardless of how carefully the conditions are arranged. That is why physical laws feel absolute. They are not supported by authority. They are supported by every failed attempt to break them. At the same time, these laws are restrained. They do not specify everything that will happen. They limit what cannot happen, regardless of clever design or effort. That restraint is exactly where their strength comes from. Taken seriously, laws stop resembling rigid formulas and start resembling the framework holding everything else in place. And that leaves a question that refuses to disappear. If the universe follows laws so reliably, where do they come from? And why does nature obey descriptions written by creatures inside it? That tension sits at the center of physics, and it does not resolve easily. That question stays in the air because the word law quietly pushes the mind in the wrong direction. A physical law often sounds like a powerful rule running the universe from behind the scenes, something active, something in charge. But at the deepest level, a law is none of those things. A law is a relationship. More exactly, it is a relationship that stays the same while everything around it changes. That is what separates a law from a coincidence. Materials can change, locations can change, sizes can change, conditions can change, and yet the same connection between quantities keeps showing up. The law does not live inside the object being studied. It lives in how measurements stay linked across many situations. This already pushes against how people usually think about rules. Rules often sound like instructions. Do this, avoid that. Physics does not operate that way. Objects do not check a rule book before behaving. Nothing pauses to see whether it is allowed to move. The law is never consulted. The law is written afterward. What physicists actually track are numbers, distances, times, masses, charges, speeds. One value is changed, another responds, and the search is for a link that refuses to disappear. When that link survives every attempt to disturb it, it earns the title law. So a law is not something the universe follows. A law is something the universe never contradicts. That difference changes how the whole subject works, because it means laws do not push events forward. They sit above events, describing how behavior stays tied together across many cases. This is where everyday thinking tends to slip. It feels natural to say a law causes behavior. Gravity causes falling. Electrical laws cause current. But the direction is reversed. Objects behave first. Laws are written later to describe how that behavior stays connected across different setups. The law describes consistency, not control. A simple example helps. Take a spring. Pull it a little, it resists a little. Pull it more, it resists more. Double the stretch, double the resistance. Change the spring, and the exact numbers change, but the link between stretch and force stays. The law is not hiding inside the spring deciding how to respond. The law captures how two measurements stay linked over many trials. At its base, that is all a law ever is, a stable connection between quantities. Now comes a part that often surprises people. Laws do not describe events. They describe limits. A law draws boundaries around which relationships are allowed to exist. Inside those boundaries, many outcomes remain possible. Outside them, nothing ever appears, no matter how carefully the setup is arranged. That explains why laws feel strict without being detailed. They do not tell you what will happen next. They tell you what will never happen at all. This role becomes clearer with conservation laws. Energy provides one example, but the same structure appears with momentum, electric charge, and rotation. These quantities move between objects, change form, or spread out, yet the total remains fixed. Nothing in the system tries to keep the total unchanged. The conservation appears only after everything settles. If an experiment ends with extra energy appearing from nowhere, the response is not excitement. The response is error, because the law does not bend. This shows another important feature. A law does not care about size. The same relationships apply to falling stones, moving planets, vibrating atoms, and distant galaxies. The numbers change, the units change, the surroundings change, the relationship stays. That wide reach is not assumed. It is earned through testing in many different situations. This is another place where expectations fail. People often expect rules to come from purpose or design. Physical laws come from neither. They are noticed because even disorder respects them. Chaotic systems obey laws just as strictly as neat ones. Wild air motion follows the same equations as smooth flow. A crashing wave respects conservation just as much as a clockwork machine. The law does not disappear when behavior looks messy. It remains in place because it never depended on tidy outcomes. This leads to an important clarification. A law does not guarantee prediction. It guarantees constraint. You may fail to predict what happens next, while still knowing certain outcomes will never appear. That certainty is where physics draws its strength, and this is where the word law earns its weight. A physical law is the strongest claim science makes, stronger than a model, stronger than a story, stronger than an explanation. It says, across all tested cases, under all accessible conditions, this relationship holds without exception. That does not make laws untouchable. New discoveries can refine them or reveal deeper structures beneath them. Even then, the older law survives inside its tested range. Newton's laws still guide bridges and baseballs. Ohm's law still guides circuits. Thermodynamic laws still govern engines and cells. The law remains because it was never about perfection. It was about consistency. At the deepest level, a law in physics is a statement about what stays fixed while everything else rearranges. It is the frame holding change together. And that brings back the question quietly waiting underneath all of this. If laws describe consistency rather than control, why does the universe show consistency at all? That question stays because laws do more than describe stability. They shape how reasoning itself works in physics. When a physicist faces a new situation, the first step is rarely prediction. The first step is elimination. A law immediately rules things out. You may not know what will happen when systems interact, but a law tells you what outcomes cannot appear under any arrangement. That power comes from the fact that laws apply before details are filled in. They operate at the level of structure, not outcome. This is how laws actually get used. Suppose two objects collide. You may not know their final speeds. You may not know the direction they move afterward. But conservation laws already fix the range of possibilities. Energy and momentum place boundaries around every allowed result. Any answer outside those boundaries is dismissed instantly, no matter how clever the explanation sounds. The law does not predict a single future. It restricts the space of futures. This is why laws remain useful, even when prediction fails. Weather cannot be forecast perfectly. Turbulence resists exact calculation. Human motion is wildly complex. Yet every one of these systems still obeys the same laws. Even when outcomes vary, relationships stay intact. This leads to a surprising result. Uncertainty in outcomes does not weaken laws. It highlights their role. A law remains exact, even when predictions are rough. That feels backward at first. People often expect exact laws to produce exact answers. Physics shows the opposite. Laws define constraints so strong that even randomness cannot escape them. This is easiest to see in statistics. Take a gas. Individual molecules move unpredictably. Collisions vary. Paths twist endlessly. Yet pressure, temperature, and volume stay linked by precise relationships. The law does not follow single particles. It governs the collective behavior without tracking details. Nothing in the gas coordinates. Nothing averages on purpose. The law emerges because every motion still respects the same restrictions. Here, a law does not describe what each piece does. It describes what the whole cannot avoid doing. This is one of the most counterintuitive features of physical laws. They grow stronger as systems grow more complex. That strength leads to consequences that often surprise people. One of them is this: multiple laws apply at the same time. No system ever follows just one law. A falling object respects gravity, energy conservation, momentum conservation, and constraints imposed by material strength all at once. These laws do not compete, they intersect. Each one trims the list of possible behaviors further. The final outcome sits at the intersection of all constraints. This is how physics stays coherent. You do not choose which law applies. All relevant ones apply together, automatically. The result is not negotiated. It is determined by compatibility. This explains why adding information does not remove laws. It narrows possibilities. Another surprising result follows from this. A law can remain correct even when the explanation behind it changes. This happens repeatedly in physics. Newton's laws described motion accurately long before deeper theories existed. Later work revealed broader frameworks that changed how motion was explained, yet Newton's laws stayed valid within their tested range. They never stopped working. They simply stopped being the deepest description available. That tells us something important about what laws are. They are not guesses about hidden causes. They are records of consistency. That is why laws age well. Now consider a paradox people often stumble into. If laws are descriptions written by humans, why do they feel so absolute? The answer lies in their origin. A law is not declared after a few successful tests. It survives relentless attempts to dismantle it. Physicists try extreme conditions, unusual materials, edge cases, and clever tricks. The law earns its status by refusing to fail. This gives laws a special role. They are not opinions strengthened by agreement. They are conclusions strengthened by resistance. That resistance shapes meaning. A law tells you something about the universe that remains true regardless of preference, perspective, or scale. It tells you reality has structure that does not bend to narrative. That realization carries weight beyond equations. It tells you the universe is not arbitrary. Events may appear chaotic, unpredictable, or complex, yet they unfold inside boundaries that never move. That makes explanation possible at all. Without laws, there could still be events. There could still be motion. There could still be change. But there could be no science. No comparison would hold. No experiment would repeat. No lesson would carry forward. A law gives memory to the universe. It allows the present to resemble the past in specific ways. And now the meaning comes into view. A physical law says that beneath all variation, something stays fixed. It says that while appearances change, relationships endure. It says that the universe does not reinvent itself moment to moment. That does not remove mystery, it sharpens it. Because laws answer how behavior stays linked while leaving the deeper question open, why this structure exists at all. Physics does not claim to answer that fully. It claims something narrower and more solid. It claims that whatever the universe is doing, it does so within limits that never waver. Those limits are what we call laws. They are not the actors in the story. They are the grammar. Without grammar, sounds still exist. With grammar, meaning appears. In the same way, events still happen without explanation. With laws, those events become intelligible. And that is why laws sit at the center of physics, not as commands, not as causes, not as decorations, as the unchanging framework that allows change to make sense at all. That realization tends to pull people forward because it suggests that learning physics is not about collecting facts. It is about learning the boundaries within which every fact must live. And those boundaries remain even as knowledge grows, even as explanations deepen, even as the universe continues doing what it has always done, behaving consistently without asking permission. At this point, the role of a law in physics comes into view without decoration. A law is not a belief about how the universe should behave. It is a record of how the universe has behaved every time we have been able to test it across places, scales, and conditions. It is a statement of consistency that reality keeps confirming. That consistency is what allows physics to function at all. After a law is established, it turns into a tool. It allows reasoning without seeing the outcome first. It allows confidence that certain results will never appear, even when the exact result remains unknown. That is the practical strength of a law. It does not describe the future in detail. It limits the future to a narrow range of allowed outcomes. This explains why very different systems can be discussed using the same laws. A swinging pendulum, a satellite orbit, and an electron bound in an atom behave differently, yet they remain tied to the same constraints. Surface details vary, the relationships remain. This also explains why laws survive progress. When physics advances, earlier laws are not discarded the way mistaken ideas are. They remain valid within the range where they were tested, even as broader descriptions add more structure underneath. Bridges still stand because Newton's laws hold. Circuits still function because electrical laws hold. Engines still run because thermodynamic laws hold. That persistence tells us something important about what is solid knowledge. Certain relationships hold without exception in every experiment performed so far. Energy does not appear from nothing. Momentum balances during interaction. Electric charge remains conserved. These statements are not guesses. They are the strongest claims science makes. At the same time, there are limits to what is known. Physics does not explain why the universe has laws rather than complete disorder. It does not explain why these particular relationships exist instead of others. It does not explain why consistency exists at all. Those questions remain open. That boundary between what is established and what remains unanswered is part of the structure, not a weakness. Laws tell us how far reasoning can go without speculation. They mark the edge where description ends and deeper explanation has not yet arrived. Taken together, this forms a clear world view. The universe is not free of constraint, and it is not fixed down to every detail. It operates within strict limits while allowing variation inside those limits. Events can surprise, yet they never violate the relationships holding everything together. That balance explains why prediction can be difficult while reliability remains absolute. It also explains why progress in science comes from tightening constraints rather than adding stories. Each new law or deeper version of an existing one removes possibilities rather than increasing them. That narrowing is progress. The takeaway is simple and strong. A physical law is the strongest form of knowledge available about the world. It does not tell us everything. It tells us what reality never does. That is enough. Because knowing what cannot happen allows technology to function, explanations to hold, and learning to continue without collapse. The universe may remain incomplete to us, but it is consistent. It behaves in ways that can be relied on, and every time a law holds, it confirms the same fact. The world is structured in a way that allows it to be studied, shared, and explained, again and again, without exception.
You think you understand gravity. Step on a scale. See the number. That's your weight. Earth pulling you down. Simple. Drop something, it falls. Moon orbits Earth. Planets circle the sun. Objects with mass attract each other. Newton figured it out centuries ago. The so-called force of gravity seems easy to understand. Simple even. Wrong. Not a little bit wrong. Fundamentally wrong about what's actually happening. Because gravity isn't a force at all. And when you finally see what gravity really is, when you really see it, the whole universe starts to look different. Let me show you. Stand up right now. Feel your weight. What are you feeling? You say, gravity, Earth pulling you down. But think about the actual sensation. The floor pressing against your feet, pushing up. That's what you feel. The floor pushing. This mysterious pull everyone talks about, you never feel it, not once. You only feel the push, always pushing up, never pulling down. So where's this pull? And here's something stranger. The moon is falling toward Earth right now, has been falling for billions of years, but it never gets closer, just circles, always falling, never landing. What kind of pull works like that? A pull that pulls forever, but never pulls anything in. And according to Newton, that pull happens instantly. Move Earth and the moon feels it immediately across 240,000 miles of vacuum, instantly. How? What carries the message? What's the mechanism? Newton himself couldn't explain it. He called it action at a distance and admitted he didn't understand how it worked. But the mathematics was beautiful. The predictions were perfect. So people stopped asking uncomfortable questions. They shouldn't have stopped. Go back several centuries. Nobody understood how planets moved. Copernicus said they orbit the sun. Fine. But how? What paths do they follow? Tycho Brahe built an observatory and spent decades recording planetary positions, night after night, year after year, measuring angles with brass instruments to fractions of a degree. Why such precision? Because you can't understand nature by guessing. You have to look. Measure carefully. Write down exactly what you see. That's where real science begins. His data reached Johannes Kepler. Kepler wanted to find the shape of planetary orbits. He tried circles. The predictions were close, but Mars was off by 8 arc minutes, 8/60ths of a degree. Most people would shrug that off as measurement error, but Kepler knew Tycho's precision. That man didn't make 8 arc minute errors. So Kepler threw out his theory and started over. After years of work, he found it: ellipses. Planets move in ellipses, with the sun at one focus. Perfect match to the data. Beautiful. But it raised a bigger question. Why ellipses? Meanwhile, Galileo was doing simple experiments, rolling balls down ramps. Sounds trivial, but watch what happens. Roll a ball down an incline. It speeds up. Let it roll onto a flat surface. It keeps going, doesn't stop immediately. Now imagine you could eliminate all friction. What would happen? The ball would roll forever. Same speed, same direction, forever. This bothered people. Surely motion requires a continuous push. Surely things naturally come to rest. No, that's backwards. Motion is natural. An object moving in a straight line doesn't need explanation. That's the default state. What needs explanation is change. Slowing down, that's friction. Speeding up, that's a push. Changing direction, that's a sideways force. This is inertia, the first law of motion, and it creates a puzzle. Planets should move in straight lines. That's their natural state, but they don't. They curve. Their paths bend continuously toward the sun. Something must be deflecting them every instant. What? Isaac Newton saw it clearly. Planets want to go straight. That's inertia. But they curve. Something changes their motion constantly. He called it gravity. Universal attraction between any two masses. The force depends on mass and distance. More mass means stronger force. Greater distance means weaker force. Specifically, force drops with the square of distance. With this one principle, everything fell into place. Why ellipses? Because planets are falling toward the sun while simultaneously moving sideways. The combination creates elliptical paths. Kepler's laws emerge naturally from Newton's force law combined with inertia. Why does the moon orbit Earth? Same principle. It's falling toward Earth, but moving sideways fast enough to keep missing. It falls around Earth instead of into it. Why does an apple fall? Earth attracts it. Same force, same law, just different scale. Newton did a beautiful calculation. He figured out how much the moon falls every second, how much its path deviates from a straight line. Then he calculated how much objects fall on Earth's surface. The numbers matched perfectly when accounting for distance. Revolutionary. The force pulling an apple is the same force holding the moon in orbit. Heaven and earth, same physics. With Newton's law, everything made sense. Ocean tides happen because the moon pulls on Earth's water. Earth is round but bulges at the equator because it spins. Comets return on predictable schedules because they follow elliptical orbits. Strange observations found explanations. Jupiter's moon sometimes appeared early, sometimes late. Turned out light takes time to travel. When Earth is farther from Jupiter, light takes longer to reach us. This led to measuring light speed for the first time. Planets wobble slightly because they pull on each other, not just on the sun. From the wobbles in Uranus's orbit, astronomers predicted a new planet, Neptune, and found it exactly where predicted. For 2 centuries, Newton's law of gravity stood as one of the greatest achievements in science. It explained everything anyone could measure, but there was one detail nobody could explain. Drop a hammer and a feather in a vacuum. They hit the ground at the same time, exactly together. The hammer has more mass. So according to Newton, gravity pulls it harder, much harder. But the hammer also has more inertia. It resists acceleration more, much more. These 2 effects cancel perfectly, not approximately, perfectly. Every object falls at the same rate, regardless of mass. Why? Newton's theory requires 2 different properties of mass. Gravitational mass determines how strongly objects attract each other. Inertial mass determines how hard it is to accelerate something. And these 2 properties are always perfectly proportional for every substance ever tested, to incredible precision. But why should the attracting property of mass and the resisting acceleration property be perfectly equal? Newton had no answer, just a remarkable coincidence that made the mathematics work beautifully. Or was it a coincidence? Einstein asked a different question. What if it's not a coincidence? What if that perfect equality is telling us something fundamental about what gravity really is? Here's a thought experiment. You're in a closed room with no windows. You feel your normal weight pressing you to the floor. Are you on Earth, or are you in a rocket in deep space, accelerating upward at 9.8 meters per second squared? Can you tell the difference? Drop something. It falls to the floor in both cases. Throw a ball horizontally, curved path in both cases. Stand on a scale, same reading in both cases. There is no experiment that can distinguish them. This is the equivalence principle. If you truly cannot tell gravity from acceleration, maybe they're the same thing. Maybe what we call sitting still in a gravitational field is actually a form of acceleration. Here's Einstein's revolution. Objects in free fall have no force acting on them. The falling apple, the orbiting moon, satellites circling Earth, astronauts floating in space capsules, none of them experience any force. They're moving naturally, following their natural paths. No forces, no pulls, nothing acting on them. But the apple is clearly falling. Yes, but what if the apple isn't accelerating at all? What if it's following the straightest possible path and it's space itself that's curved? This is Einstein's profound insight. Gravity is not a force between objects. Gravity is the curvature of space and time. Massive objects don't pull on other objects. They warp the space around them. They bend it, curve it, distort the geometry. The apple isn't being pulled to the ground. It's following the straightest possible path through curved space-time. But space-time near Earth is curved, so straight points toward Earth's center. You standing on the ground aren't being pulled down. You're trying to follow your natural path through curved space-time, a path toward Earth's center. But the ground is in your way. The ground pushes you upward, preventing you from following that natural path. That's what you feel as weight, not gravity pulling down. The ground pushing up, deflecting you from your natural trajectory through curved space-time. Einstein made a concrete prediction. If gravity is really curved space-time, then light should be affected too. Light has no mass. In Newton's theory, gravity shouldn't affect light at all. But if gravity is curvature of space itself, then light following the straightest path through curved space should bend. During a solar eclipse, astronomers measured the positions of stars near the sun's edge. The stars appeared displaced from their true positions. The starlight had bent, passing near the sun. exactly as Einstein predicted. This is gravitational lensing. We see it in observations all the time now. Massive objects bend light from more distant objects behind them, creating distorted images. Direct evidence that space itself curves in the presence of mass. Astronauts in orbit look weightless, floating around. Zero gravity up there, right? Wrong. The gravitational field at the altitude of satellites, a couple hundred miles up, is almost as strong as here on Earth's surface, about 90% as strong. So why do astronauts float? Because they're falling. The capsule is falling. Everything is falling toward Earth constantly. But they're also moving sideways very fast, about 17,000 miles per hour. As they fall, Earth's curved surface falls away beneath them. They keep missing. They fall around Earth instead of into it. Everything falls together at exactly the same rate. So there's no sensation of falling, no weight, no sense of up or down. It feels exactly like floating in empty space, far from any mass. This is equivalence in action. Free fall in a gravitational field feels identical to floating freely in empty space because they are the same thing. In free fall, no force acts on you. You're following the natural geometry of curved space-time. Think of Earth's surface. It's curved, but standing on it, it looks flat to you. And here's something remarkable. Why is Earth round in the first place? Because of gravity, but not in the way you think. It's not that some force is pulling everything toward the center, molding Earth into a sphere. It's that space-time around Earth's mass is curved equally in all directions. Every piece of rock, every drop of water is trying to follow the straightest path through that curved geometry. And when everything follows those curves from all directions equally, you get a sphere. The only shape where every point on the surface is the same distance from the center. Earth is round because that's what happens when matter follows curved space-time. The shape emerges naturally from the geometry. An ant walking what it thinks is a straight line on that curved surface actually follows a curve. But from the ant's perspective, it's going perfectly straight. That's what's happening with everything near Earth, except it's not just space that's curved, it's space and time together, space-time. Massive objects create curves in space-time, depressions, wells, distortions. The sun creates a deep well. Earth creates a smaller one. Even you create a tiny well, too small to measure easily, but it's there. Objects moving near these wells naturally follow the curves, not because anything pulls them, because they're following the straightest possible paths through curved geometry. The moon orbits Earth because it's following the natural geometry of curved space around Earth. That geometry makes the straightest path into a circle. An apple falls because it's following curved space-time near Earth's surface. In that curved geometry, straight ahead through time points toward Earth's center. When you throw a ball, it follows a parabola, not because gravity pulls it down, because it's moving through curved space-time, and the straight line in that curved space looks like a curve to you. You're standing light now. You feel weight. In Newton's picture, gravity pulls you down and the floor pushes you up. Two forces balanced. In Einstein's picture, only one force acts on you, the floor pushing up. But if there's only one force, you should be accelerating, and you are. You're accelerating upward constantly. The natural path through space-time points toward Earth's center. That's the free fall trajectory. But the floor is in your way. It pushes you upward, deflecting you from that natural path. You're like someone standing in an accelerating rocket. The floor pushes. You feel weight. not from any downward pulling force, from being accelerated away from your natural path. The apple hanging in a tree is also being pushed upward by the branch. When the branch breaks, the pushing stops. The apple is suddenly free to follow its natural path through curved space-time. It falls, but the apple isn't accelerating. The apple is finally free to move naturally. You, standing on the ground, are being constantly accelerated upward by the floor pressing against your feet. Falling is the natural state. Standing still requires a force. That's Einstein's revolution. Once you understand gravity as geometry, extreme phenomena make sense. A star is essentially a massive ball of gas. Its mass creates a deep well in space-time. The natural paths in that curved space point inward. What prevents collapse? Pressure from nuclear reactions in the core pushing outward. Balance. When the nuclear fuel runs out, the pressure drops. Balance breaks. The star collapses. If the star is massive enough, the collapse continues until matter is compressed to incredible density. Atomic nuclei merge. Electrons are crushed. What emerges is a neutron star. Nuclear matter compressed to city size. A teaspoon of this stuff would weigh 1 billion tons. For even more massive stars, not even neutron pressure can stop the collapse. Space-time curves so sharply that all possible paths lead inward. Even light cannot escape. This is a black hole. Near a black hole, space-time is so severely warped that light itself, following the straightest possible paths through this geometry, spirals inward and never comes out. We can't see black holes directly, but we see their effects. Matter falling toward a black hole speeds up, heats up, radiates enormous energy before disappearing. All from one idea. Mass curves space-time. Objects follow the curves. From this one principle, everything follows. Planetary orbits, tides, the precession of Mercury's perihelion, a tiny effect Newton's theory couldn't explain, but Einstein's predicts perfectly. Gravitational lensing, black holes, gravitational waves rippling through space when massive objects collide. The same principle explaining how the moon orbits also explains the largest structures we observe. Galaxies, clusters of galaxies, universal, elegant. The pattern in the small piece reveals the design of the whole fabric. Newton's equations work beautifully for practical purposes. We use them to launch satellites, calculate orbits, predict eclipses. They're simpler than Einstein's equations and accurate enough for most applications. But Einstein revealed what gravity actually is. Not a mysterious force pulling objects together across empty space. The curvature of space and time themselves. Mass tells space how to curve. Curved space tells objects how to move. When you step on that scale, you're not measuring a downward pull. You're measuring how hard the scale must push to prevent you from following your natural path through curved space-time. When you watch something fall, you're seeing an object finally free to follow the geometry that mass has woven into the fabric of reality. When you look at the moon, you're seeing an object following the straightest possible path through the curved space around Earth, a path that looks like a circle because space itself is curved. Space brings objects together. That's what we call gravity, not a force, geometry. And that is far more beautiful than any mysterious pull could ever be.
Let's get something straight first. Time travel isn't weird. Your thinking about time is what's weird. Most discussions about time travel are childish. You go back, you kill your grandfather, you disappear. That's not a paradox. That's a failure to define the rules. Here's the paradox you've probably never heard of. If time travel is possible, then ignorance becomes impossible. Think carefully. Suppose you travel back 10 years to prevent a mistake. If you succeed, the mistake never happened. If the mistake never happened, you never had a reason to go back. People call this a loop. That's wrong. It's not a loop. It's a logical self-erasure. Now, here's where it gets uncomfortable. We assume time is something that records events, but time doesn't record anything. Time enforces consistency. Reality does not allow contradictions, not because they're dramatic, but because they're meaningless. So if you went back and changed something, one of three things must be true. You didn't actually change anything. You created a new separate history, or the concept of changing the past is nonsense. Let's destroy the first one. If nothing changed, then free will is cosmetic. You're acting, but the outcome is already locked. That's not freedom, that's choreography. The second option sounds better, multiple timelines. But now you've made the universe do accounting. Every decision splits reality? Then the universe isn't elegant. It's wasteful. Nature doesn't multiply paperwork unless forced, which leaves the third option. Maybe the paradox exists because the question is malformed. We ask, can I change the past? But that assumes the past is a thing you can edit. It isn't. The past is not a place. It's a logical consequence of the present. You don't go back in time the way you walk into another room. You would have to violate causality, the very rule that allows events to exist in order. And here's the punchline most people miss. If time travel were truly possible, knowledge would travel faster than causes. Information would arrive before reasons, effects would precede explanations. At that point, science collapses. Prediction replaces understanding, and understanding is the whole game. So maybe the universe solved the problem already, not by banning time travel, but by making self-consistent histories the only ones that can exist. No contradictions, no rewrites, no dramatic rescues. Just one brutal rule. If an event happened, it happened because it could happen, without breaking logic. And that's the paradox you've never heard of. Time travel doesn't fail because it's impossible. It fails because reality refuses to explain nonsense. If this made you uncomfortable, good. That means you were thinking time travel isn't paradoxical because of machines. It's paradoxical because of logic. That single sentence already eliminates 90% of the nonsense people talk about. Shiny devices, spinning portals, flashing lights. None of that matters. You can imagine any machine you want. The real problem starts the moment you ask a simple question: what happens when cause and effect stop agreeing with each other? People love to blame technology for the paradoxes. They think the universe breaks because a machine is too powerful. That's comforting because machines feel optional. Logic doesn't. Logic is not a feature of reality, it is reality. When logic collapses, nothing meaningful is left to talk about. Take the classic idea you go back in time to change something. Already, that sentence is infected. Change compared to what? If the past can be changed, then it wasn't the past. It was just a draft. And if the past was only a draft, then the present has no authority. Everything becomes provisional. Reality turns into a rough sketch with no final version. Now slow down and be precise, because precision is where weak ideas die. If you travel back to prevent a disaster, and you succeed, then the disaster never occurred. If it never occurred, then the knowledge that motivated you to travel back never existed. If that knowledge never existed, then the trip never happened. That's not drama. That's contradiction. A statement that deletes the conditions required for its own existence is not mysterious. It's meaningless. Most people try to escape this by saying it just creates another timeline. That sounds smart until you examine it. What justifies the split? What physical rule says reality must duplicate itself to protect your feelings about free will? If every altered event spawns a new universe, then the universe is doing infinite work to preserve human storytelling. Nature does not care about your narrative satisfaction. When a theory becomes bloated just to survive criticism, it's already on life support. Others say, you were always meant to go back. Everything is fixed. That's cleaner, but now you've paid a different price. Choice becomes decoration. You can deliberate, struggle, panic. The outcome remains unchanged. You're not an agent. You're a performer reciting lines you didn't write. That may be logically consistent, but it empties responsibility of meaning. If nothing could have happened differently, then explanation replaces accountability, and explanation alone is not enough to live by. Here's the deeper problem most people never notice. Time travel doesn't just threaten events. It threatens knowledge. Knowledge depends on order. You learn something because something else happened first. But if information can travel backward without its causes, then knowledge detaches from reality. You could receive answers before questions exist. You could act correctly without understanding why. At that point, science stops being a method and turns into a coincidence generator. Predictions might still work, but understanding evaporates. And without understanding, you're not doing science, you're doing fortune-telling with equation. People assume paradoxes are exotic edge cases. They're not. They are alarms. A paradox is reality telling you your definitions are broken. When logic produces a contradiction, it's not asking you to be impressed, it's telling you to stop. The mistake is imagining time as a container, like a hallway you can walk back into. Time is not a place, it's a constraint. It's the rule that says events must be ordered in a way that makes explanations possible. Remove that rule, and event stops meaning anything at all. You don't ask whether you can travel outside logic any more than you ask whether you can draw a square circle. The words fit together grammatically, but they don't point to anything real. The universe doesn't forbid nonsense, it ignores it. So when people ask, is time travel possible? They're usually asking the wrong question. The better question is, what kinds of histories are allowed to exist without contradiction? And the answer seems brutally simple. Only those where every event fits consistently with every other event. No edits, no retroactive justifications, no exceptions made for clever ideas. That doesn't mean time travel is impossible in every mathematical sense. It means that if something resembling it exists, it will not behave the way stories demand. It won't let you fix your regrets, save the day, or rewrite mistakes. It won't give you power over history. It will preserve consistency at all costs, including your expectations. And that's the uncomfortable conclusion people resist. The universe doesn't care what you want to change. It only cares whether your story makes sense. If it doesn't, reality doesn't argue. It simply refuses to participate. Most people misunderstand causality. They treat time like a road instead of a rule. That single mistake quietly ruins almost every conversation about time, choice, and reality. A road is something you move along. A rule is something that constrains what movement even means. Confuse the two, and you start asking questions that sound deep but collapse the moment you apply discipline. When people imagine time as a road, they picture themselves as travelers, forward, backward, detours, exits. It feels intuitive because we evolved to think spatially, but intuition is not evidence. A road exists independently of the traveler. Time does not. Time is not something events happen in. It is the condition that allows events to be ordered at all. Remove that condition and before and after lose their meaning. Causality is not a habit of the universe. It's a requirement. Without it, explanation dies. If an effect can occur without a cause or before its cause, then why becomes a decorative word. You can still describe what happened, but you can't understand it. And a universe that allows description without explanation is not mysterious. It's useless. The road metaphor fails because roads allow revisiting. You can turn around, retrace steps, take alternate paths. Rules don't allow that. You don't visit the rules of arithmetic. You obey them or your answers stop meaning anything. Time works the same way. You don't walk through it, you conform to it. This is why people get confused about free will. They imagine choice as standing at a fork in the road, left or right. But causality doesn't present forks, it presents consequences. Your decision is not floating above the past, it is shaped by it. Your thoughts, values, fears, and impulses did not appear from nowhere. They are the result of prior conditions. That doesn't make choice an illusion, it makes it a process. A process still counts, even if it has a history. Treat time like a road, and you start believing in do-overs. Treat it like a rule, and you realize something harsher. Once an event exists, it constrains everything that follows, not morally, logically. The universe doesn't punish you for mistakes, it incorporates them. People resist this because it feels cold. They want time to be forgiving, but forgiveness is a human concept. Physics deals in consistency. Once something has happened, it becomes part of the structure future events must fit into. You can't erase it any more than you can erase a solved equation without breaking the logic that led to it. This misunderstanding also infects how people think about the future. They imagine it as an open stretch of road, empty and waiting. But the future is not empty. It is tightly constrained by the present, not fixed in detail, but bounded in possibility. Just as chess allows many games but forbids illegal moves, reality allows many futures but rejects contradictions. Freedom exists inside rules, not outside them. When people say causality is broken at small scales or extreme conditions, they usually mean their expectations are broken. The universe did not stop obeying rules. It revealed rules that don't resemble everyday experience. That's not a failure of causality. It's a failure of imagination. The road metaphor also leads to a dangerous comfort, the belief that if something goes wrong, you can always go back. But causality doesn't work that way. Consequences propagate forward not because the universe is cruel, but because coherence demands it. If effects didn't follow causes, nothing could be learned. Memory itself would be unreliable. Learning requires order. Order requires rules. This is why the past feels heavy, not emotionally, structurally. The past is not heavy because it hurts. It's heavy because it's already integrated into the framework of what exists. You don't carry it. You are built on top of it. Every moment rests on an accumulation of earlier moments, whether you acknowledge them or not. Seeing time as a rule doesn't eliminate wonder. It sharpens it. The fact that the universe permits stable patterns, reliable explanations, and cumulative knowledge is not obvious. It is an achievement of consistency, and consistency is fragile. Break it, and meaning collapses with it. So when someone asks whether time can be bent, reversed, or escaped, the real question is simpler. Can the rules that allow explanation survive that change? If not, the idea isn't radical, it's incoherent. Time is not a road you travel. It is the rule that makes travel intelligible at all. The real paradox isn't can you change the past, it's what does change even mean? That question sounds harmless until you realize almost no one ever defines it. People argue passionately about altering history without agreeing on what alteration requires. They assume change is obvious, like repainting a wall or editing a document. But the past is not an object sitting around waiting for revision. It is a logical structure, and structures don't respond to wishful thinking. To change something, there must be a reference state. Change implies comparison before and after, but the past already is the before. There is no external vantage point from which you can observe two versions of the same past and declare one altered. If you claim a past event has changed, you must answer a brutal question: changed relative to what and observed by whom? People imagine time like a recording that can be paused, rewound, and overwritten. But recordings exist in time. The past does not. Once an event occurs, it becomes part of the explanation of everything that follows. You can't revise an explanation without revising the thing it explains. That's not editing. That's erasing coherence. Suppose you go back and prevent a mistake. If the mistake is prevented, then the history in which it occurred never existed. If it never existed, then the description prevented has no target. You didn't change anything, you replaced the entire context in which the word mistake made sense. Language breaks first. Logic follows. This is why people retreat to the idea of multiple timelines. They think it solved the problem by allowing two incompatible histories to coexist. But coexist where? If both histories exist, then nothing was changed. Something new was created. That's not time travel, it's universe duplication. The original past remains untouched. The word change is smuggled in, doing work it never earned. Others argue the past can be changed but must remain self-consistent. That sounds precise until you notice it quietly eliminates change altogether. If everything remains consistent, then whatever you did in the past was already part of it. You didn't alter history, you fulfilled it. The language of change survives, but the substance disappears. The discomfort comes from realizing that change is a present tense concept. Change happens to things that are still happening. The past, by definition, is not happening. It is settled, not emotionally settled, logically settled. Treating it as malleable confuses process with record. This confusion leaks into everyday thinking. People say they want to change the past when they really mean they want the consequences to stop mattering. They want relief, not revision. But consequences don't listen to desire. They propagate because that's what consistency demands. To understand why the paradox persists, notice how casually we treat time as a backdrop. We imagine ourselves stepping outside it, manipulating it like a tool. But any act of manipulation would itself require time to occur. You can't step outside the condition that allows stepping. The moment you try, your description eats itself. If change were possible in the past, then truth would become unstable. Facts would require timestamps, not just for when they occurred, but for which version of reality you're referring to. Knowledge would lose its footing. Science would become archival guesswork. Memory would stop being evidence. The universe seems allergic to that kind of instability, not morally, structurally. It permits uncertainty, probability, and surprise, but it does not permit contradictions that dissolve meaning. When an idea implies something both happened and did not happen, in the same explanatory frame, the universe doesn't get dramatic. The idea simply fails to describe anything. So the paradox isn't about machines or loops or daring rescues. It's about language outrunning clarity. We use the word change because it works so well in ordinary life, then we drag it into a domain where it no longer applies. When the contradictions appear, we blame reality instead of our definitions. Once you strip the romance away, a quieter picture emerges. The past is not a thing to be edited. It is the fixed set of conditions that make the present intelligible. You don't change it, you are constrained by it. And within those constraints, you act, choose, and create consequences that will one day become just as fixed, that may feel limiting. It's actually what makes meaning possible. A world where the past could be changed wouldn't be flexible, it would be unintelligible. Nature doesn't care about intuition, it only respects consistency. That statement sounds harsh because intuition feels personal. We trust it. We grow up using it. It helps us survive. But survival is not the same as truth. Intuition is a local tool, shaped by evolution to handle falling objects, social signals, and immediate danger. Nature, on the other hand, operates without concern for what feels reasonable to the human mind. The mistake people keep making is assuming that what feels obvious must be fundamental. It isn't. Intuition is an afterthought, a side effect of biological convenience. Nature existed long before human expectations and will continue long after them. It does not adjust its rules to make sense to us. It does not slow down to explain itself. It simply remains internally consistent. Consistency is the quiet backbone of reality. Without it, nothing holds together. If the same conditions could produce different outcomes without reason, then explanation would be impossible. You could describe events, but you could never understand them. Science would collapse into storytelling, and prediction would be reduced to guessing. Consistency is not elegance, it is necessity. This is why reality so often offends common sense. Common sense evolved for mid-sized objects moving at moderate speeds, not for particles that behave like probabilities or space-time that bends under mass. When intuition clashes with evidence, intuition loses. Not because it's stupid, but because it was never designed for this scale of truth. People often say, that can't be right, it doesn't make sense. What they really mean is, it doesn't match my internal model. Nature is under no obligation to respect that model. The only thing it must respect is that its rules do not contradict themselves. As long as they don't, the universe is satisfied. This is why paradoxes matter. A paradox is not a mystery to admire, it's a warning label. It tells you your assumptions are inconsistent. The universe does not resolve paradoxes for you. It exposes them and waits. If you insist on keeping contradictory ideas, the failure will belong to your explanation, not to reality. Consider how often intuition misleads. It says time flows at the same rate everywhere. It doesn't. It says objects are solid and separate. They aren't. It says cause must always come before effect in the way we imagine it. Even that turns out to be more subtle than expected. Each time intuition fails, consistency remains intact. The rules hold, even when our understanding breaks. People romanticize the idea that reality should be understandable. But understandability is a luxury, not a right. The universe is not a classroom designed around human cognition. It is a system that happens to allow observers like us to exist. That allowance does not include comforting explanation. This is also why technological metaphors fall apart. We compare the universe to computer simulations or machines because those are things we built. But those metaphors borrow their coherence from nature's consistency in the first place. We didn't invent logic, we discovered it. And logic doesn't bend to preference. When intuition and consistency collide, the responsible move is not to defend intuition harder, it's to interrogate it. Ask why it feels obvious. Ask what assumptions are hiding underneath. Most intuitive beliefs are just habits we've never been forced to justify. Consistency doesn't mean rigidity. Nature allows uncertainty, randomness, and probability, but even those obey rules. Randomness is not chaos, it's structured unpredictability. Even chance has boundaries. Even uncertainty has mathematics. That's the point most people miss. The moment you accept that consistency outranks intuition, your thinking changes. You stop asking whether something feels right and start asking whether it holds together. You stop trusting first impressions and start demanding internal coherence. Confusion becomes a signal, not a failure. This attitude is uncomfortable because it strips away the illusion that the universe owes us clarity. It doesn't. Clarity is something we earn by aligning our models with what is consistent, not with what is comforting. Nature does not negotiate with human instinct. It does not reward imagination unless it respects structure. It does not care what you expect, only whether your ideas contradict themselves. That indifference is not cruel. It's the reason anything works at all. If a theory allows contradiction, reality will quietly refuse to cooperate. It won't explode, it won't announce an error, and it won't argue with you. It will simply stop making sense under that theory, and the failure will be yours to notice. That quiet refusal is how reality enforces discipline. Contradiction is not a dramatic problem, it's a fatal one. The moment a theory permits two mutually exclusive outcomes under the same conditions, it loses the right to explain anything. Explanation depends on exclusion. To explain why something happened is to rule out why it didn't. When a framework allows both, it explains neither. People often mistake contradiction for complexity. They say it's subtle or it's beyond our understanding. That's an excuse. Complexity still obeys rules. Contradiction does not. A complex system can be hard to predict, but it remains internally consistent. A contradictory system cannot even be wrong in a useful way. Reality has no mechanism for handling inconsistency. It doesn't average contradictions. It doesn't compromise between them. It simply behaves in one way every time the same conditions occur. If your theory predicts otherwise, reality doesn't adapt. Your theory dissolves. This is why failed ideas often linger in language long after they've failed in practice. People keep using the words because the contradictions are not obvious at first glance. The theory sounds plausible. It feels flexible, but flexibility that allows anything to happen explains nothing. When everything is allowed, nothing is constrained, and without constraint, there is no understanding. Consider what a contradiction actually does. It breaks implication. If A can lead to B and not B under identical circumstances, then observing A tells you nothing. Knowledge collapses into noise. Memory loses meaning. Prediction becomes superstition. And yet, people cling to contradictory ideas because they are emotionally convenient. They let you keep incompatible beliefs without choosing. They protect intuition at the cost of coherence. But nature doesn't care about that comfort. It only responds to what is consistent. This is why experiments are ruthless. They don't care how elegant your theory sounds. They don't care how long you worked on it. They ask one question: does reality behave the way you say it does? If not, the conversation ends. Not loudly, definitively. When a theory fails, reality doesn't fail with it. The universe continues behaving exactly as it always has. Only your desk. Ription collapses. This asymmetry is important. It tells you where authority lies. Reality is the judge. Theory is the applicant. People sometimes think contradictions can be isolated, patched over, or postponed. They can't. A single contradiction infects the entire structure. Once you allow one, you've abandoned the principle that makes explanation possible. From that point on, every conclusion is optional. This is why just so explanations are dangerous. They are stories designed to fit outcomes after the fact. They don't predict, they excuse. And because they can be adjusted to explain anything, they are immune to correction. That immunity is not strength, it's irrelevance. Reality resists being cornered by bad ideas. It doesn't protest, it just stops lining up. Measurements drift, predictions fail, patterns vanish, not because the universe changed, but because your map no longer corresponds to the territory. The refusal is quiet because it has to be. If reality reacted dramatically to every wrong idea, nothing would be stable. Instead, it remains indifferent. It allows you to be wrong as long as you like. It simply won't reward you with understanding. This is also why consistency feels so powerful when you encounter it. A consistent theory doesn't need decoration. It doesn't need excuses. It works across cases, across scales, across time. Its strength is not in its ambition, but in its restraint. Contradiction is a signal to stop, not to improvise. When you encounter one, the correct response is not to push harder, but to step back and ask what assumptions smuggled it in. Somewhere a definition was sloppy, a concept was overloaded, or a metaphor was mistaken for a mechanism. Reality will not bend to save a broken idea. It will not explain itself twice to accommodate confusion. It will simply continue being what it is. And if your theory cannot keep up, reality won't argue. It will quietly refuse to cooperate. You think you know what you're asking when you ask, why do magnets repel? H, you don't. And until you understand why, your question is broken, you're going to be frustrated by every answer anyone gives you, including mine. Let me show you the problem. Pick up two magnets, north pole to north pole. Feel that push, that invisible resistance in empty air. You want to know why? You want me to say magnets repel for the same reason that H and then fill in the blank with something. Familiar rubber band springs too, hands pushing against each other, something you already understand. Here's the thing. There is no familiar thing, H, and I'm not being difficult. I'm not hiding behind complexity. I'm telling you the truth that most people don't want to hear. Magnetic forces are fundamental. They're rock bottom. There's nothing underneath them to compare them to. You're asking me to explain electromagnetism by comparing it to something simpler, but there isn't anything simpler. That's like asking me to explain arithmetic by using something more basic than numbers. Can't be done, H. Now you're thinking, wait, I've heard. Explanations, magnetic fields, electrons, spinning. Those sound like deeper. Explanations, no, they're descriptions. Very precise, very accurate descriptions. They tell you how the force behaves, not why it exists in the first place. And you need to understand the difference between those two things or this entire. Conversation is pointless. Let me ask you something. Push your hand down on your desk right now. Go ahead, push hard. Why doesn't your hand go through? You'll probably say because the desk is solid. Wrong. Not wrong because the desk isn't solid. It is, but wrong because that's not an explanation. That's just another label for the thing. You're trying to understand. Try again. Why doesn't your hand pass through? Because the atoms are packed together. Better. Keep going. Why don't the atoms in your hand pass through the atoms in? The desk, because atoms are solid too. No. Stop. Think about this. Atoms are not solid. An atom, it's mostly empty. Space, if you scaled an atom up to the size of a football stadium, the nucleus would be a P at the center. The electrons would be tiny dots way out near the seats. Everything in between is empty. Your hand is essentially all empty space. The desk is essentially all empty space. So why don't they pass through each other? You're starting to get uncomfortable now. Good, you should be. The answer is electromagnetic. Repulsion between electrons. The electrons in your hand and the electrons in the desk have the same charge. Like charges repel, so when you push down, you're feeling trillions of tiny electromagnetic interactions all adding up to what you call solid. Now here's the question that's going to really bother you. Why do like charges repel? You can't answer that, can you? You can. Say electromagnetic force, but that's just giving it a name. That's not explaining anything. It's like saying, why do magnets repel? Because of magnetic force. That's circular. That's not an explanation. The electromagnetic force is one of four fundamental forces in nature. It's not caused by something else. It's not derived from something simpler. It just is. And here's what nobody tells you. The force that stops your hand at the desk surface, that's the exact same force that makes magnets push apart. The same force, not similar, not analogous, identical, the electromagnetic force. So why does one feel obvious and the other feel mysterious? I'll tell you why. You've been pushing on solid objects since you were 6 months old. By the time you were 2, your brain had built up an enormous library of experiences. Pushing, grabbing, falling down, hitting the ground. Your neurons wired themselves around those experiences. They built patterns, expectations, a whole intuitive framework. So now, when you push on a desk, it feels normal, natural, obvious. You don't think about it. You don't think it needs explaining, but magnets push through empty space. You can see the gap. You can slide a piece of paper through. There's nothing there. That feels weird. That feels wrong. That feels like it needs an explanation. But here's the truth. The weirdness is in your head, not in the physics. When you push on the desk, the electrons in. Your hand never actually touch the electrons in the desk. They repel at a distance, a tiny distance, a few atomic widths, but still a distance. We call it contact because the distance is too small to see. But it's not really contact. Nothing is touching. It's electromagnetic repulsion operating across a gap. With magnets, the gap is bigger, a centimeter, an inch big, enough to see, big enough to make you uncomfortable. But the force is the same. The mechanism is the same. The only difference is scale. The mystery you feel is not a mystery in the physics. It's a mystery in your psychology. You're comfortable with electromagnetic repulsion at atomic distances because you've experienced it your whole life. You're uncomfortable with electromagnetic repulsion at centimeter distances because it's less familiar. That's it. That's the whole difference. Now, you're probably thinking, okay, fine, but surely quantum mechanics explains why the electromagnetic force exists. Wrong. Again, quantum electrodynamics, the quantum theory of electromagnetism, is the most precisely tested theory in all of science. We've measured certain predictions to 11 decimal places, and the theory matches exactly. But here's what QED does. It tells you how to calculate electromagnetic interactions with absurd precision. It gives you rules, equations, predictive power. What it does not do is tell you why the electromagnetic force exists in some deep philosophical sense. It describes the force beautifully, perfectly, but it doesn't explain it away. It doesn't reduce it to something simpler, because there isn't anything simpler. Let me show you how this works with a different example. You ask, why does ice float on water? I can tell you because. Ice is less dense than liquid water. Why is it less dense? Because the molecular structure has more space between them. Molecules, why does it have that structure? Because of how hydrogen bonds arrange themselves. At freezing temperatures, why do hydrogen bonds arrange that way? Because of the quantum mechanical properties of electrons in water. Molecules, why do electrons have those properties? Because of the Schrödinger equation and the Pauli exclusion principle. Why do those equations hold? See what's happening at each step? I'm giving you a deeper answer, but I'm also just pushing the question back one level. Eventually, and this happens, fast, you hit bedrock, the fundamental equations, the basic forces, and there, the only honest answer is that's what we measure. That's what the universe does. We can describe it mathematically. We can test it experimentally. We can use it to make predictions and build technology, but we can't explain it in terms of something more fundamental because there isn't anything more fundamental. The chain of why has to end somewhere. Here's the deep problem with your question about magnets. When you ask why, you're not really asking for information. You're asking for comfort. You're asking me to connect the unfamiliar thing to something familiar. So you can stop feeling confused. You want a story, a narrative, a chain of cause and effect that ends with something you already understand. But magnets repel because of the electromagnetic force. And the electromagnetic force exists because that's a fundamental property of the universe. There's no story. There's no deeper because there's just measurement. And mathematics now, I know that's not satisfying. I know you want more. But the universe doesn't care what you want. The universe is what it is. Let me tell you what really bothers me about this question. You're treating magnets like they're special, like they're the one weird thing in a universe of normal things. That's backwards. Everything is. Electromagnetic, if you look closely. Enough. Why do chemicals react? Electromagnetic forces rearranging. Electrons. Why does light bounce off mirrors? Electromagnetic interaction. Why do you see colors? Electromagnetic radiation. Hitting your retina. Why does your computer work? Electromagnetic forces. Moving electrons through circuits. The electromagnetic forces in some exotic phenomenon that only shows up in magnets. It's everywhere. It's the dominant force in your entire life. Gravity weaker by a factor of 10 to the 36, completely irrelevant for atoms and molecules, the strong and weak nuclear. Forces locked inside atomic nuclei, too, short range to affect anything you can touch. Everything else, and I mean everything, is electromagnetism. The force making magnets push apart is the same force holding your body together right now, the same force preventing you from falling through your chair, the same force letting you read these words. So when you ask me to explain magnetic repulsion by comparing it to something normal, you're asking me to explain electromagnetism. Using electromagnetism, it's circular, can't be done. Let me try a different approach. Maybe this will help. You know how you can explain the color blue to someone who can see. You show them the sky, a blue shirt, you give examples, but how do you explain blue to someone blind from birth? You can talk about wavelengths about 450 nanometers. You can describe where it sits between red and green in the spectrum. You can give them all the physics of blue, but none of that conveys the experience, the actual bless. They have to see it. There's no shortcut. Same with magnets, same with electromagnetism. You don't get the intuition from an analogy. You don't get it from a 5-minute explanation. You have to work with the mathematics, solve problems, make calculations, predictions, test them. After months, maybe years of working with electromagnetic theory, something shifts. In your brain, the equations start to feel natural, intuitive, obvious, not because they match your everyday experience, but because you've built a new everyday experience, mathematical. Experience with how fields behave, and then magnets aren't mysterious anymore. They're exactly what you'd expect inevitable consequences of. Charged particles and fields, but you can't shortcut that process. You can't skip to the end. You have to earn the intuition. Now, let me tell you what I can give you. The technical answer. Magnets have magnetic dipole moments, little arrows. Of magnetism, when you align lots of them in the same direction, you get a permanent magnet. Those dipoles create a magnetic field. Configuration that stores potential. Energy. Physical systems naturally evolve toward lower energy states. When two north poles face each other, the energy is high. Moving them apart lowers the energy, so they repel. That's the answer. That's as deep as it goes. You want to know why dipoles create fields? I can tell you about moving charges and electron spin. You want to know why electrons have spin? I can tell you about the Dirac equation and quantum Mechanics, you want to know why the Dirac equation is correct? I can tell you it follows from combining special relativity with quantum mechanics. You want to know why those theories hold? Because they match reality, because we've tested them millions of times and they work. That's it. That's where the chain ends. Here's what you need to understand about how physics actually works. We don't start with philosophy and derive the universe. We start with measurements. We observe patterns. We write equations that describe those patterns. We test those equations against new experiments when the equations work, when they let us predict things we haven't seen yet. We say we understand the phenomenon. Understanding in physics doesn't mean philosophical satisfaction. It doesn't mean matching your intuition. It means predictive power. It means being able to calculate, to predict, to build. Technology that works by that standard we understand. Electromagnetism better than almost anything. Quantum electrodynamics is tested to incredible precision. We can calculate the magnetic moment of an electron to 11 decimal places in the measurement. Agrees exactly. So when I say I understand magnets, I mean this. I can calculate the force between them. I can predict how they'll behave in different configurations. I can design electric motors, generators, MRI machines. I can manipulate magnetic fields to trap particles or focus beams. That's real understanding. That's what physics offers. Not comfort, not familiar analogies, but power, control over nature. You might not like this answer. You might find it unsatisfying, tough. The universe doesn't owe you an explanation that makes you comfortable. It doesn't owe you a story that matches your intuition about how things should work. Your intuition evolved to throw rocks, pick fruit, and avoid predators. On the African savanna, it did not. Evolved to understand quantum fields or electromagnetic interactions at the atomic scale. So when physics reveals something that violates your intuition, particles acting like waves, time slowing down at high speeds, magnets pushing through empty space, you have two choices. You can reject it as mysterious and unsatisfying and keep asking for better explanations that don't exist, or you can expand your intuition, learn the mathematics, work through the problems, build new mental models based on equations and experiments, not everyday experience. That's what physicists do. None of us found quantum mechanics intuitive at first, but we worked with it long enough that it became familiar, and eventually it started to feel natural, not because it matches common sense, but because we built new common sense, mathematical common sense. So here's what I want you to take away from this. The next time you pick up two magnets and feel them push apart, don't. Ask why. Ask how does the force depend on distance? How strong is it compared to gravity? How can I calculate it? How can I use it? Those questions have answers. Good. Answers, precise answers, beautiful. Answers, the why question, the one asking for. Reduction to something more familiar. That question doesn't have an answer, not for magnets, not for any fundamental. Force, because fundamental means exactly that bottom level, nothing underneath. But here's the beautiful thing that people miss when they get stuck on why what physics reveals is that the universe operates according to a small set of rules, the same equations that describe magnets also describe. Lightning, brain signals, computer. Chips, the northern lights chemical. Bonds, why stars shine, why atoms are stable. That's not a failure to explain. That's unification. That's discovering that underneath all. The apparent complexity and chaos of nature. There's a deep structure, a mathematical structure, simple rules with incredibly complex consequences. That's what should blow your mind. Not that we can't reduce magnets to something simpler, but that we can reduce thousands of seemingly different phenomena to the same underlying force you wanted me to explain magnets by, comparing them to something familiar. But I'm telling you something better. Everything familiar is actually magnets, or rather everything is. Electromagnetism, same thing. Your desk, your body, the air, light, chemistry, life itself, it's all different aura. Gemenso. Electromagnetic interactions, you're not separate from the magnets, you're made of the same force. So was my refusal to answer the BBC interviewer arrogant? No, it was honest. I could have given him a comfortable lie. Magnets are like springs, or think of magnetic fields as rubber sheets, or whatever would have made him nod and feel satisfied, and he would have learned nothing. Instead, I told him the truth. The question itself was broken. The kind of why he wanted doesn't exist. At the fundamental level, things just are. And our job is to describe them accurately, not to reduce them to something more Comfortable. People hated that answer, called it evasive, called it a failure to communicate. But they were wrong. Sometimes the most honest answer is the universe doesn't work the way you expect. Your intuitions are wrong. And if you want to understand what's really happening, you need to learn a new way of thinking. That's not arrogance, that's respect. Respect for the truth, respect for the actual structure of reality, and respect for you, for your ability to handle that truth instead of needing a comfortable fiction. So pick up those magnets one more time, feel that invisible push. Now, understand you're feeling one of the four fundamental forces of nature. The same force that makes chemistry work, the same force that makes stars shine, the same force holding you together. Right now. That's not mysterious. You think the speed of light is just a number? 299792458 ms. Fast, really fast. The fastest thing we know, fine. But why is it the limit? Why? Can't you go faster? What stops you? Most people have never really thought about this. They just accept it. Einstein said so. Speed of light is the cosmic speed limit. That's just how it is. But that's not an answer. That's just repeating words. When you really ask why nothing can go faster than light, when you dig into what's actually stopping you, you discover something so strange, so fundamentally different from everyday experience that it changes everything you think you know about space and time. The speed of light isn't just a speed. It's not just the fastest thing. It's the structure of the universe itself. It's woven into the fabric of space and time in a way that makes going faster literally meaningless. Let me show you what I mean. Let's start with something simple, something everyone knows. Things fall, drop something, it falls down. 16 ft the first second to be precise. That's what Galileo measured. Drop a ball, drop a rock, drop anything in 1 second. It falls 16 fort. Now the moon. The moon is going around the earth. It's not falling down. It's staying up there orbiting, going in a circle. But wait, is it falling? Think about it. If the moon were just sitting there in space, not moving, what would happen? It would fall toward the earth. Gravity would pull it in, but the moon is moving. It's moving sideways, tangent to its orbit. And because it's moving sideways while gravity pulls it down, it keeps missing the earth. It falls toward the earth, but keeps missing. That's what an orbit is, continuous falling while moving sideways, fast enough to keep missing. Now, here's where Newton had his brilliant insight. The moon is 240,000 mi from the center of the earth. We're standing on the surface 4,000 mi from the center. So the moon is 60 times farther away than we are. Newton said, what if gravity gets weaker with distance? What if it follows an inverse square law? That means if you go twice as far away, gravity becomes 4 times weaker, 3 times as far, n times weaker the square of the distance. If that's true, then at the moon's distance 60 times farther, gravity should be 62 times weaker. That's 3,600 times weaker. Now, on Earth, things fall 16 ft in 1 second. If gravity at the moon is 3,600 times weaker, then the moon should fall toward Earth by 16 feet, 3,600. Do the math. 16 fort divided by 3,600. That's about 1/12 of an inch per second squared. Wait, let me say that differently. In 1 second, something at the moon's distance should fall toward Earth by 1/12 of an inch, 3,600, because we're talking about the square of time in the formula. 1/12 of an inch, 3,600 equals 16 fort, exactly what we measure on Earth. Newton calculated how far the moon should fall toward Earth in 1 second if gravity follows an inverse square law, and it matched perfectly. The moon is falling at exactly the rate Newton's law predicts. This was huge. This wasn't just a theory. This was a prediction. Newton took a completely independent fact, how fast things fall on Earth, and connected it to another completely independent fact, the period of the moon's orbit and its distance from Earth. Two things that seemed totally unrelated suddenly became connected by one law, the law of gravitation. There was no going back. Now, Newton went further. He calculated what the shape of planetary orbit should be if gravity follows an inverse square law, and he found that it should be an ellipse. And guess what? Planets do move in ellipses. Kepler had already measured that, but Kepler didn't know why. Newton explained it. He got 3 for 2, as it were, and then more things fell into place. The tides. Why are there tides? Because the moon pulls on the Earth. But wait, if the moon just pulls the Earth toward There should only be one high tide per day, right? The bulge of water on, the side facing the moon. But there are 2 tides per day every 12 hours, roughly. Why? Some people thought the Earth was pulled away from the water. Others thought the water was pulled toward the moon. Both were sort of. Right, but neither got it completely. Newton realized what was really going on. The force of the moon on the Earth and on the water is the same at the same distance. But the water on the near side is closer to the moon than the Earth is, so it gets pulled more. And the water on the far side is farther from the moon than the Earth is, so it gets pulled less. So you get 2 bulges, one where the water is pulled more toward the moon, one where the water is left behind, because the Earth is pulled more than that water. 2 tides per day. Actually, the Earth does the same trick as the moon. It goes around a circle. The center of the circle is somewhere inside the Earth. The Earth and moon both orbit their common center of mass. If you wish, this water is thrown off by a centrifugal force more than the Earth is. And this water is attracted more than the average of the Earth at any rate. The tides were explained, and the fact that there were 2 a day, a lot of. Other things became quite clear. Why the Earth is round? Because everything gets pulled in. Why it isn't perfectly round? Because it's spinning. So the outside gets thrown out a little bit and it balances. Why the sun and moon are round, and so on. Now, as science developed and measurements were made ever more accurately, the tests of Newton's law became much more stringent. The first careful tests involved the moons of Jupiter. By careful observations of the way they went around over a long period of time, one could check very carefully that everything was according to Newton's laws, and it turned out not to be the case. The moons of Jupiter appeared to get sometimes 8 minutes ahead of schedule and sometimes 8 minutes behind the schedule, where schedule is the calculated values according to Newton's laws. 8 minutes, that's a huge discrepancy. Something was wrong. But wait, it was noticed that they were ahead of schedule when Jupiter was close to the Earth and behind schedule when Jupiter was far away. Rather odd circumstance. Mr. Roma, having confidence in the law of gravitation, came to an interesting conclusion. It takes light some time to travel from the moons to the Earth. And what we're looking at when we see the moons are not how they are now, but how they were some time ago. The time it took the light to get here. When Jupiter is near us, it takes less time for the light to come. When Jupiter is farther, it takes longer. So he had to correct the observations for the differences in time, and by the fact that they were this much too early or that much too late, he was able to determine the velocity of light. This was the first demonstration. That light was not instantaneously propagated. Think about what just happened. We found the speed of light, not by measuring light directly, but by having confidence in the law of gravitation when something didn't match, instead of throwing out Newton's law. Roma said, what if light takes time to travel? And he was right. I bring this particular matter to your attention because it illustrates something. When a law is right, it can be used to find another one by having confidence in this law. If something is the matter, it suggests perhaps some other phenomenon. And if we had not known the law of gravitation, we would have taken much longer to find the speed of light, because we would not have known what to expect of Jupiter's satellites. This process has developed into an avalanche of discoveries. Each new discovery permits the tools for much more discovery. And this beginning, it's the beginning of that avalanche which has gone on now for 400 years in a continuous process. And we're still avalanching along at high speed at this time. But here's the thing. Once you know the speed of light, once you measure it, you start noticing something very, very strange. Light always travels at the same speed, always, no matter who measures it, no matter how fast you're moving. Let me make this concrete. You're standing still. You shine a flashlight. You measure the speed of the light coming out, 299.792.458 m's, fine. Now you get on a train, a fast train moving at, say, half the speed of light. You shine the flashlight forward. In the direction the train is moving, common sense says the light should now be traveling at the speed of light plus the speed of the train, just like if you throw a ball forward from a moving train, the ball moves faster than if you threw it while standing still. But that's not what happens. You measure the light, it's still traveling at 299.792.458 ms, exactly the same speed. You say, Okay, maybe I measured wrong. So you get the train going even faster, 90 the speed of light. You shine the flashlight forward again, you measure still. 299,792,458. MS. You get frustrated. You get the train going at 99.9999 the speed of light. You shine the flashlight. You measure. Still the same speed. The speed of light does not add. It doesn't combine with your speed. It's always the same, no matter how fast you're moving. This should break your brain. This is not how speeds work in every day. Life, speeds add. If you're on a train moving at 50 miles per hour and you walk forward at 3 miles per hour, moving at 53 miles per relative to the ground. But light doesn't do this. Light always moves at the same speed relative to you, no matter how fast you are moving. Why? Einstein realized what was going on, and it's so strange, so contrary to common sense that even now, over a century later, people struggle to accept it. Time and space are not fixed. They're flexible. They bend and stretch to keep. The speed of light constant. When you move faster, time slows down. For you, your clock literally ticks slower and distances contract. The space in front of you gets compressed. These effects are real. They are not. Optical illusions. They're not. Measurement errors. Time actually slows. Space actually contracts. And the amount they change is exactly the right amount to make the speed of light come out the same for everyone. Let me say that again. The universe adjusts time and space, bends them, stretches them, compresses them to ensure that light always travels at the same speed for everyone. The speed of light is not just a speed, it's a structural constant of the universe. Space and time are arranged in such a way that this speed is the same for everyone. Now, here's where it gets even stranger. If you try to accelerate something, anything to the speed of light, something very weird happens. The closer you get to the speed of light, the harder it becomes to go faster. It's not that you run out of fuel. It's not that your engine isn't strong enough. It's that the object itself resists acceleration more and more. We call this relativistic mass increase. As you go faster, your inertia increases. It becomes harder and harder to push you faster. And as you approach the speed of light, your inertia approaches infinity. To actually reach the speed of light, you would need infinite energy, which is impossible. So nothing with mass can ever reach the speed of light, not because of some arbitrary rule, not because of engineering limitations, but because the structure of space-time itself prevents. Light can travel at that speed because photons have no mass. Zero massless particles can travel at the speed of light. In fact, they must. They have no choice. They're always moving at that speed. But anything with mass, it can get close, very close. 99.99999 of the speed of light, but never quite there. Universe won't let you. Now, you might ask, but why? Why is the universe set up this way? Why is there a speed limit at all? And here's the answer that's going to frustrate you. There isn't a deeper why. The speed of light isn't the speed limit imposed on the universe. It's a consequence of how the universe is. Structured space and time are not separate. They're woven together into space-time, and space-time has a geometry, a structure, and that structure has a built-in conversion factor between space and time. That conversion factor is the speed of light. It's not that light is special. It's that space-time has a maximum rate at which cause and effect can propagate. Light happens to travel at that rate because light has no mass, but the rate itself is a property of space-time, not of light. If light didn't exist, the speed limit would still be there. It's a feature of the universe itself. Here's another way to think about. In everyday life, you think of space and time as separate things. You move through space. Time passes. They're independent, but they're not. You're always moving through space-time at a constant rate. Always, but that motion is divided between space and time. If you're sitting still, all your motion is through time. You're moving into the future at maximum speed, 1 second per second. But if you start moving through space, you have to divert some of that motion away from time. You're now moving through space and time, which means you're moving through time more slowly. The faster you move through space, the slower you move through time. And there's a maximum. If you could move through space at the speed of light, you would have zero. Motion left for time, time would stop. For you, this is why light doesn't experience time. From a photon's perspective, it's emitted and absorbed in the same instant. No time passes. The universe is frozen. You can't go faster than light because you can't have less than zero motion through time. That's the limit. That's the wall. And here's the beautiful part. This isn't just theoretical. We've tested this over and over and over. Particles and accelerators get accelerated to 99.99999, the speed of light. And guess what? The closer they get, the harder it becomes to accelerate them further, exactly as predicted. GPS satellites have to account for time dilation. They are moving fast and they're in a weaker gravitational field, so time passes differently for them than for us on the ground. If we didn't correct for this, GPS would be off by miles within a day, muons created in the upper atmosphere by. Cosmic rays should decay before reaching the ground. Their lifetime is too short, but they're moving close to the speed of light, so time slows down for them. From their perspective, they live long enough to reach the ground. From our perspective, they live longer because they're moving fast. Either way, more muons reach the ground than should. Exactly as relativity predicts, it's not speculation. It's measured. The speed of light being a limit is as well tested as anything in physics. So let's bring this all together. Why is the speed of light the limit? Because space-time is structured in a way that has a maximum rate of cause and effect. That rate is the speed of light. Not because light is special, but because space-time itself has this built-in conversion factor between space and time. You can't go faster because going faster would require moving backwards in time, which doesn't make sense. You can't have negative time. You can't undo cause and effect. The speed of light is the speed at which now propagates through the universe. It's the speed at which information can travel. It's the speed at which forces act. It's the maximum rate of change. And this process, this avalanche of discovery started with Newton figuring out gravity by watching the moon. Then Roma figuring out the SPE. Ed of light by watching Jupiter's moons. Then Einstein, realizing that the speed of light is constant and deriving relativity from that. Then thousands of experiments confirming it. Each discovery building on the last, each new insight opening doors to more insights. That's how science works. That's the avalanche that's been going on for 400 years. And we're still avalanching along at high speed at this time. The speed of light isn't just a number. It's the key. It's the thing that unlocks how space and time work. It's
for humans, the entire universe could not function without light. We see and understand things because of light. Without it, our eyes cannot see objects. In fact, we humans couldn't survive without the sun's light. Light plays a crucial role in understanding the structure and properties of everything from atoms to the universe. This light raises many questions for humanity. Since ancient times, we've been trying to understand what light is. Light acts like a messenger of information. When it encounters an object, it reflects off that object, carrying information from it, then enters our eyes. Within a millionth of a second, our brain processes this information and helps us understand what we are seeing. Even though light is a messenger of information, it is itself invisible. That's why space appears so dark. We can only see the existence of light when it encounters an object. We see rays of sunlight because they pass through dust or gases. We already know that light travels at the incredible speed of around 300,000 kilometers and doesn't require any medium to travel. This is the maximum speed of our universe. It is a very special and unique property of light. Nothing else can travel at this speed. However, one of the greatest physicists of the 19th century who worked on electricity and magnetism predicted through his equations that light is just a part of radiation. Along with light, all radiation travels at the same speed. This radiation is called electromagnetic radiation, or electromagnetic waves, electric and magnetic force. Every charged particle in our universe has an electric field. An electric field is simply a distribution of force, or lines of force. Electric field lines are the simplest way to understand an electric field. First introduced by the father of electricity, Michael Faraday, electrons have a negative charge, so they have an electric field, while protons have a positive charge and also have an electric field. However, the fields differ depending on the charge. For a positive point charge, the electric field lines radiate outward, while for negatively charged, the electric field lines radiate inward. Simply put, the electric field originates at a positive charge and terminates at a negative charge. In the case of an isolated positive point charge, the electric field line starts at the charge and extends to infinity. For an isolated negative point charge, the electric field lines start at infinity and end at the negative charge. So this field exists around the charge at all times, even if there are no other charge particles nearby. Although the range of an electric field may be infinite, the strength decreases with distance, meaning the field is stronger near the charge. The electric field is responsible for electric force, where, like same charges repel each other and opposite charges attract. The field is always active. When two opposite charges come close together, the electric field of the positive charge links with the electric field of the negative charge. When two positive charges come close together due to their similar outward fields, they repel each other. Magnetic forces were first observed in natural magnets. Similar to electric fields, magnets also have a field called a magnetic field. A magnet always has two poles, a north pole and a south pole. Magnetic field lines always start at the north pole and end at the south pole of the magnet. Like electric charge is similar. Magnetic poles repel each other, while opposite poles attract. The main difference between electric and magnetic fields is that in nature, negative and positive charges can occur independently of one another, whereas magnets always have two opposite poles. We have never found independent magnetic poles in nature with only north pole or only south pole. Even if a magnet is cut into two pieces, each piece becomes a new magnet with both a north and south pole. No matter how many times we cut it, the pieces always have opposite poles. Electromagnetic force. Our universe operates with four fundamental forces: the strong force, the weak force, gravitational force, and electromagnetic force. Electromagnetic force is a combination of electric force and magnetic force. But why do we combine them? Why can't they be separate forces? The story of electromagnetism begins with the invention of the battery. In 1800, Alessandro Volta invented the battery, a device that pushes electrons from one place to another. This movement of electrons is known as electricity. An electron is a charged particle, so when a charged particle moves, it creates electricity. In 1820, Danish physicist Hans Christian Oversted conducted a famous experiment. He placed a compass near a current-carrying wire. Naturally, a compass needle points in the direction of north and south pole, direction of Earth. But when he placed near the current-carrying wire, the needle deflected from its original direction. This demonstrated that the movement of charges produces magnetic effects, which is why the compass needle was deflected. However, a stationary charge, no matter how large, has no effect on a magnetic needle. A charge must be moving in order to create a magnetic field. When charged particles move in a straight line, they produce magnetic fields around them. For charges moving in the opposite direction, the magnetic field will also be opposite. This can be easily explained by the right-hand rule. Point your right-hand thumb along the flow of current. Then curl your fingers as if wrapping around the wire. The direction your fingers point is the direction of the magnetic field created by the current. The 19th century was an incredible period for new inventions. At that time, the only source of electricity was the battery. But the demand for electricity was enormous. Scientists had to find a way to produce electricity other than by using batteries. Faraday worked on this problem. He asked himself if electricity could produce magnetism. Why couldn't magnetism produce electricity? After years of work, he succeeded in 1831. When a coil of wire is connected to a current meter and a magnet is moved inside the coil, the needle on the meter deflects. When a magnet moves forward, electrons start moving. When the magnet moves backward, electrons start moving in the opposite direction. A changing magnetic field causes electrons to move in different directions. If we place a light bulb, we can see that the bulb starts glowing because the moving electrons create electricity. This indicates that a changing magnetic field produces a changing electric field. With this discovery, we later created generators, which are used to produce electricity. Generators are simple. When we rotate, a magnet changes in its direction, produce electricity. Thus, a charge will produce a magnetic field, but only if it's moving. A magnetic field will produce a current, but only if it's changing. A moving charge produces a magnetic field. But what happens if the moving charge suddenly changes direction? This phenomenon was explained very well by one of the greatest physicist mathematicians, origin of electromagnetic waves. Faraday's ideas on electricity and magnetism were put into mathematical form by physicist James Clerk Maxwell. He formulated 4 beautiful equations on electricity and magnetism. For easy understanding, let's review these formulas in simple terms. His first equation is above, UT electricity. It states that electric charges, whether positive or negative, create an electric field. The second equation is about magnetism. All magnets have two poles. The magnetic field starts at one pole and ends at the other. Therefore, magnetic charges cancel each other out. This means there are no magnets that exist with only one pole. Magnets always have two poles. And the magnetic charges cancel each other out. The third equation explains that a charge in motion produces a magnetic field, and a changing magnetic field induces a changing electric field. These first three equations are relatively straightforward, and we already have some understanding of them. Now we move on to the next step. What happens when a charge accelerates? Acceleration means an object changes its speed or direction. A charged particle can vibrate, which means it continuously changes direction, and vibration implies acceleration. Let's observe the vibration in slow motion. First, the charge moves upward, creating a clockwise magnetic field around the charge. Then the charge moves downward, creating a counterclockwise magnetic field. This happens very quickly. So the magnetic field around the charge also changes rapidly. Now it becomes clear. We already know that changing magnetic fields can induce changing electric fields. So as the charge vibrates, the changing electric field induces a changing magnetic field, and the changing magnetic field induces a changing electric field. This process repeats continuously, propagating through space. The electric and magnetic fields work together to push each other along. This field conversion is called electromagnetic waves. At any point, the electric and magnetic fields are perpendicular to one another and to the direction of propagation. This is the fourth equation of Maxwell. Electromagnetic waves are produced whenever a charge is in accelerated motion. These waves don't require any medium to travel. They can propagate through a vacuum. If the charge stops vibrating, new electromagnetic waves won't be produced. But the waves already created will continue to spread. From his equation, Maxwell calculated that electromagnetic waves propagate through space at a constant speed of 300,000 kilometers and never slow down or stop. He realized the speed is very close to something familiar to us, the speed of light. This led him to conclude that light itself is an electromagnetic wave. However, the existence of electromagnetic waves was only a mathematical prediction by Maxwell. But in 1888, German physicist Heinrich Hertz produced electromagnetic waves in his laboratory and proved that their speed is 300,000 kilometers, is in a vacuum. This was the first experimental proof of electromagnetic waves. We know that accelerating charges produce electromagnetic waves, but why do charged particles accelerate? And how can light and electromagnetic waves be the same? To answer this, we need to understand the basic nature of waves. Structure of electromagnet. IC wave. Like ocean waves, electromagnetic waves have crests and troughs. The crest is the highest point of the wave, and the trough is the lowest point. The center between the lowest and highest points is called the mean position. The distance from the mean position to the crest or trough is called the amplitude. This is the height of the wave. An amplitude is measured in meters. The distance between two consecutive crests or troughs is called the wavelength, which is also measured in meters. Its symbol is lambda. A crest and a trough together make up one wave cycle. If one wave cycle passes through a point in 1 second, the time period is 1 second or 1 hertz. If 10 wave cycles pass through a given point in 1 second, then it's 10 hertz, which is called the frequency. The number of wave cycles passing a particular point in 1 second is its frequency. Consider 3 electromagnetic waves traveling at the same speed. Since the speed of these 3 waves is the same, the number of wave cycles crossing a point per second would vary, e.g., if the first wave cycle is long, fewer wave cycles will pass per second compared to the other 2 waves. So the first wave has a low frequency, while the third wave has a higher frequency. This means that a longer wavelength has a lower frequency, and a shorter wavelength has a higher frequency. The frequency of a wave is inversely proportional to its wavelength. But how do electromagnetic waves have different wavelengths and frequencies? We know T. HAT electromagnetic waves are produced by the acceleration of charged particles. But not all charges accelerate or vibrate at the same rate. If a charge vibrates slightly, it produces lower frequency electromagnetic waves. If a charge accelerates rapidly, it produces higher frequency electromagnetic waves. So the intensity of vibration determines the frequency of an electromagnetic wave. The basic principle of electromagnetic waves is that their speed in a vacuum is equal to their wavelength, multiplied by their frequency. If we multiply any given electromagnetic wave's wavelength and frequency, we get the speed of light. The speed of light never changes. If we want to find the wavelength of an electromagnetic wave with a frequency of 900,000 Zs, we just need to use this formula. So wavelength equals the speed of light divided by the frequency. In this case, we would find that the wavelength is 330 meters. The wavelength and frequency are directly related to each other. All electromagnetic waves carry energy, and the amount of energy depends on their frequency and amplitude, the higher. The frequency, more energy, the lower the frequency, the less energy. Electromagnetic waves come in different wavelengths, frequencies, and energies, so we classify them into different categories. Classification of electromagnetic waves, we already know that the distance between two consecutive crests is called the wavelength. The longest electromagnetic waves are 100,000 kilometers long with a frequency, why as low as 3 hertz. Electromagnetic waves can theoretically have wavelengths as long as 1 billion km. But such wavelengths are undetectable because their frequency is less than 1 hertz. Even at a speed of 300,000 kilometers, such a wave wouldn't compete 1 cycle per second, so the energy becomes undetectable. The shortest electromagnetic waves have a wavelength of 10⁻12 meters, or even smaller, with a frequency of 10 to the power of 24 or more. Based on wavelength and frequency, we categorize electromagnetic waves into different groups: radio waves, microwaves, infrared, visible light, ultraviolet, X-rays, and gamma rays. The most extreme waves are gamma rays, which have extremely high frequency and energy. Depending on their frequency, their energy varies. The human eye can detect only a certain range of electromagnetic waves between wavelengths of 380 nanometers and 760 nanometers, which we call visible light. Visible light, since visible light is familiar to us, we will start with this group. Unlike other groups, it's very special because we see things and understand the universe through visible light. To understand visible light, we need to look into Bohr's model of the atom. Electrons orbit the nucleus and different energy levels. And these energy levels vary by atom. Energy is measured in electron volts for a hydrogen atom. The first shell's electron has minus 13.6 eV. The second shell has minus 3.4. The third shell minus 1.5, and so on. The energy of electrons and atoms is quantized, meaning that the energy of F. The first shell is fixed at minus 13.6 eV. It cannot be minus 13.7 or minus 13.5. This is the same for all hydrogen atoms in the universe. In nature, electrons orbit in their ground state, but when they gain energy, they jump to a higher energy level. E.g., imagine an electron in a hydrogen atom gains some energy, and it jumps from the second orbit to the third orbit. The electron in the second orbit has minus 3.4 eV, and in the third orbit, it has minus 1.5 eV. This means the electron gained 1.9 eV of energy. That's why it jumped from the second to the third orbit. As we have seen before, electrons always prefer to be in the lowest available orbit, so they eventually return to a lower orbit. Return means it undergoes acceleration and its velocity changes. When a charge is accelerated, it emits electromagnetic radiation. We know that the wavelength, frequency, and energy of electromagnetic waves depend on the rate of acceleration or vibration of the charge. When an electron moves from the third orbit back to the second orbit, it emits an electromagnetic wave with an energy of 1.9 eV. This energy packet is called a photon. Electromagnetic waves and photons are the same. Particle nature, electromagnetic waves, or photons. There is a formula for converting energy into wavelength. And in this case, we find that the electromagnetic wave has a wavelength of 654 nanometers. The visible light range starts from a wavelength of 760 nanometers to 380 nanometers, which we call the visible light spectrum. A wavelength of 654 nanometers corresponds to red light. In the visible light spectrum, red light has the longest wavelength, while violet has the shortest wavelength. The energy range for visible light from red to violet is 1.63 eV to 3.26 eV. Any energy released within this range is visible light. If an electron in a hydrogen atom jumps from the fourth orbit to the second orbit, it emits electromagnetic waves with an energy of 2.55 eV. corresponding to a wavelength of 488 nanometers, which is green. Thus, we have red light, green light, blue light, violet light, and many others. They differ only in wavelength, frequency, or energy. Perception of color, that something happens in our minds. White light consists of all color wavelengths. But when it strikes an object, most of the color wavelengths are absorbed by the object's atoms, leaving only red light to be emitted. That's why red objects appear red. A wavelength of 654 nanometers is emitted by just one hydrogen atom at a time. But the sun contains 10 to the power of 57 hydrogen atoms. Due to the extreme pressure of the sun's inner core, atoms heat up and gain varying amounts of energy, causing electrons to jump between different energy levels. Depending on the distance of their jumps, they emit electromagnetic waves of different wavelengths. Electromagnetic waves are not only emitted by the sun's inner atoms. In the sun's plasma, countless free electrons vibrate randomly, also emitting electromagnetic waves of various wavelengths. Plasma refers to the part of the sun where unpaired ions and nuclei exist. Moreover, there are trillions of stars in the universe, all emitting electromagnetic radiation. All high-temperature objects emit visible light, electromagnetic waves. Humans also emit electromagnetic radiation, but not in the visible light range, infrared radiation. Infrared radiation lies just beyond red visible light, with wavelengths between 760 nanometers and 1 million nanometers, or 1 millimeter. When an object is not quite hot enough to radiate visible light, it emits most of its energy in the infrared range. Infrared radiation has an energy range of 0.0012 eV to 1.65 eV, e.g. if a molecule releases 1 eV of energy, its wavelength is 1,240 nanometers, which falls in the infrared range. Infrared radiation is produced by the vibration and collisions of molecules within an object. You might wonder how neutral molecules, which have no charge, can produce electromagnetic waves. Take the carbon dioxide molecule as an example. It consists of 1 carbon atom and 2 oxygen atoms. Carbon has 6 electrons, and oxygen has 8 electrons. So the molecule has 22 protons and 22 electrons, making it electrically neutral. However, the electron distribution is uneven. The atom with more electrons pulls the atom with fewer electrons. So in this case, the oxygen atom pulls the carbon atom more strongly, creating an electrical imbalance between atoms. The atom with more electrons becomes a negative pole, while the atom with fewer electrons becomes a positive pole, even though the overall molecule is neutral. It has 2 electrical poles and is called a dipole molecule. When the charge oscillates, it produces electromagnetic waves. During molecular vibration, these charge poles stretch or vibrate, producing electromagnetic waves. The frequency of electromagnetic waves depends on the frequency of molecular vibration or rotation. Each molecule has a different range of vibration modes. For instance, when carbon dioxide absorbs the right amount of energy for vibration, it produces a wavelength of around 1,000 nanometers. Thus, carbon dioxide can absorb or emit electromagnetic waves with a wavelength of around 1,000 nanometers. Heat causes molecules to vibrate, since heat is the primary source of infrared radiation. Any object with the temperature emits infrared radiation. Even objects we think of as cold, such as ice, emit infrared radiation. In fact, an object with a temperature above absolute zero emits radiation. Absolute zero temperature is minus 273 degrees Celsius, and achieving absolute zero is physically impossible. Our average body temperature is 37 degrees Celsius, so we constantly emit electromagnetic waves with wavelengths of around 10,000 nanometers, which are infrared. As we can see, the wavelength of electromagnetic waves depends on how hot objects are. As heat decreases, the intensity of electromagnetic radiation decreases, causing the wavelength to increase. Hotter objects release shorter wavelengths because their atoms vibrate more rapidly, while cooler objects release longer lengths. Since infrared lies beyond the visible light spectrum, we cannot see it, but some animals, such as snakes and frogs, can detect. Even though we cannot see infrared radiation, we can feel it as heat. However, we have managed to create infrared cameras that help us see infrared radiation, which is useful in many industries. At night, when there is no visible light, all objects on Earth become dark, but they still emit infrared radiation. With the help of infrared cameras, we can see objects in the dark, microwaves. Microwaves have wavelengths longer than infrared waves, ranging between 1 millimeter and 1 meter with corresponding. Energy ranges from 0.0012 to 0.000012. EV. We are most familiar with microwaves because they cook food rapidly. Every food contains water molecules, and these water molecules can absorb specific ranges of EM waves. In a microwave oven, there is a vacuum chamber with magnets and electrodes called a magnetron, which produces a specific range of electromagnetic waves. When these waves encounter water molecules, they cause the molecules to vibrate and rotate. These vibrations and the resulting friction between the molecules generate heat, cooking the food quickly. In household microwave ovens, we typically use electromagnetic waves with wavelengths of 122 millimeters. Microwaves are reflected by metals but can easily pass through plastic or glass, which is why we use plastic or glass containers to cook food in the microwave. Microwaves are also used for long distance and satellite communications, radar systems for spacecraft navigation, and measuring the speed of vehicles. Radio waves. In the electromagnetic spectrum, radio waves have the longest wavelengths and the lowest frequencies. Their wavelengths range from 1 meter to 100,000 kilometers, with frequencies ranging from 300 MHz to 3 Sh. 1 MHz is equal to 1 million Sh. At 300 MHz, the wavelength is 1 meter. Due to their long wavelengths, radio waves are considered the safest form of non-ionizing radiation. Since their wavelengths are long and their frequencies low, they have low energy. The energy of radio waves ranges from 0.000012 eV to 10^-14 eV. Non-ionizing radiation doesn't have enough energy to remove tightly bound electrons from atoms, so it doesn't cause damage to the cellular structure of our bodies. However, long-term exposure to radio waves with higher frequencies can increase body temperature. Radio waves are produced by charged particles when they accelerate. We artificially produce radio waves more than any other type of electromagnetic wave by moving electrons back and forth in a device called an antenna. Naturally, these waves are produced by lightning and astronomical objects such as galaxies and nebulas. We have seen that electromagnetic waves with longer wavelengths than visible light have lower frequencies and energies, making them non-ionizing radiation. Thus, they are safe for use in everyday life. Wavelengths from 700 nanometers to 100,000 kilometers are considered non-ionized radiation. Unionized radiation cannot break the atoms and molecules in living organisms. However, electromagnetic waves with wavelengths shorter than visible light are extremely high in frequency and energy, making them very harmful. Ultraviolet radiation makes up about 10% of the total electromagnetic radiation from the sun. UV wavelengths range from 400 nanometers to 10 nanometers, with energy levels between 3.1 and 12 eV. Like visible light, ultraviolet radiation is emitted by excited electrons. For example, consider the Bohr's model of a hydrogen atom. The electron in the first orbit has minus 13.6 eV, and in the second orbit it has minus 3.4 eV. If the electron gains enough energy, it can jump from the first to the second orbit. When it returns to the first orbit, it emits 10.2 eV of energy, which corresponds to a wavelength of 122 nanometers, since ultraviolet waves fall between 410 nanometers in wavelength and between 3.1 and 12 eV of energy. An electron returning from the second to the first orbit in a hydrogen atom releases ultraviolet radiation. Similar to hydrogen atoms, mercury, helium, and carbon atoms are also major sources of UV radiation. Ultraviolet radiation is divided into 3 groups based on wavelength, frequency, and energy. UVA, that's 400 to 320 nanometers. 300 to 280 nanometers, and UVC, that's 280 to 100 nanometers. UVC is the most harmful form of UV radiation. But how exactly is it harmful to humans? Our bodies function based on DNA, which instructs cells on how to work. DNA consists of complex molecules. Molecules are made of atoms, and when UV radiation enters DNA molecules, It causes electrons within the atoms to absorb energy and jump to higher energy states. This sudden change in electron position can break the bonds between atoms in the molecule, causing the structure of the molecule to collapse. This molecular collapse leads to damaged DNA. Since damaged DNA can no longer properly instruct cells, the result is malfunctioning cells. This can lead to harmful conditions such as cancer, skin burns, eye damage, and a weakened immune system. Fortunately, most UV radiation is absorbed by the ozone layer. The ozone layer contains ozone molecules, and when UV radiation strikes these molecules, it breaks them apart into dioxygen, O2, and individual oxygen atoms. This process absorbs the energy of the UV rays, preventing them from reaching Earth's surface. The individual oxygen atoms then recombine the dioxygen to form ozone molecules again. This continuous reforming cycle of ozone protects life on Earth from harmful ultraviolet radiation. X-rays. X-rays have wavelengths shorter than ultraviolet waves, ranging from 10 nanometers to 0.01 nanometers, with equivalent energy levels between 12 eV and 120,000 eV. When high-energy photons strike an atom, they can eject tightly bound electrons from the atom's inner shell, ionizing the atom by causing it to lose an electron. As we know, electrons always seek to fill the inner shell, so when higher energy shell electrons fall, enter the inner shell. They release X-rays. X-rays can also be produced when high-energy, negatively charged free electrons pass near the positively charged nucleus of an atom. As the electrons are deflected by the nucleus due to the attraction between opposite charges, this sudden change in direction emits a continuous X-ray spectrum. This process is called Bremsstrahlung radiation. We produce X-rays by sudden collision of high-speed electrons. Although X-rays are more harmful than ultraviolet rays, we have developed ways to manage and use them safely. Gamma rays.
Not a small lie, not an exaggeration, a complete, total, devastating lie, and millions of students around the world are learning from books just like it. Right now, today, thinking they're getting educated, thinking they're learning science. They're not. They're being deceived. And they don't even know it. Sakta put the book down, so how do I know? Because Richard Feynman discovered this lie in 1952 in a classroom in Brazil. And what he found was so shocking, so disturbing, that it changed how he thought about education forever. And once you understand what he discovered, once you see what he saw, you'll never look at education the same way again. Direct address, today, I'm going to tell you that story. Feynman's shocking realization in a Brazilian classroom. And I'm going to show you why this discovery matters to you right now. Whether you're a student, a parent, a teacher, or just someone trying to learn anything in this world. Because the lie Feynman discovered, it's everywhere in schools, in universities, in online courses, in books, in the entire education system. And until you understand this lie, until you can recognize it and reject it, you'll keep struggling to learn. You'll keep feeling like you're supposed to understand but don't. You'll keep thinking the problem is you. It's not you. It's the lie. Walk across stage. Let me tell you the story. Because this story is one of the most important things Feynman ever discovered. Not about physics, about learning itself. It's 1952. Feynman accepts a visiting professorship at the Center for Physical Research in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. He's going to teach physics to graduate students for 10 months. He's excited. New country, new culture. Smart students eager to learn. It should be amazing. As a posit, and at first it is. The students are attentive. They take detailed notes. They memorize everything he says. They can recite back to him perfectly. They ace the exams. They're model students, the kind every teacher dreams of having. Or slow down, but Feynman starts to notice something strange, something disturbing. He asks students questions that require applying the concepts he's taught. Not just reciting them, applying them, thinking with them, using them to solve new problems. And they can't do it. Let that land. And they can recite the definition of polarization. But they can't explain what happens when light reflects off water. They can recite the formula for angular momentum. But they can't figure out what happens when a spinning wheel is tilted. They know all the words. They can pass all the tests. But they don't understand anything. Feynman shares his confusion and Feynman is confused. How is this possible? These are smart students at a good university with qualified professors, learning from standard textbooks. How can they know so much and understand so little? So he starts investigating. He sits in on other classes. He looks at the textbooks. He talks to students. He talks to professors. Build tension, and he makes a discovery. A shocking discovery. A discovery so disturbing that he gives a passionate speech about it at the end of his time in Brazil. A speech that gets him in trouble with the education establishment. What did he discover? A had a direct statement. He discovered that the students weren't learning science. They were learning to pretend to learn science. And worse, nobody knew the difference. Not the students, not the professors, not the system. They had created an elaborate theater of education, where everyone played their roles. Teachers taught, students studied, exams were passed, degrees were awarded, but no actual learning was happening. Pausing. Let me show you exactly what he found, because when you see this, you'll recognize it. You'll see it in your own education, your children's education. Everywhere. Share the first discovery first. Feynman discovers that students are memorizing words without understanding their meaning. He picks up a physics textbook, standard textbook, used in universities across Brazil, and he reads a passage about friction. The book says, when a body slides on a surface, the coefficient of kinetic friction is less than the coefficient of static friction. Look up part, the students can recite this perfectly, word for word. They've memorized it. So Feynman asks, can you give me an example of this in real life? Silence. Okay, try this, you're pushing a heavy box across the floor. At first it's hard to get it moving, but once it starts moving, it's easier to keep it moving. Why? Car pauses, still nothing. These students can recite the textbook definition about coefficients of friction, but they can't connect it to pushing a box. They can't see that the textbook is talking about something they've experienced 100 times. Ours make the point, they've memorized words. But the words have no meaning, no connection to reality, no connection to experience. The words are just sounds to be repeated on exams. That's the first part of the lie, teaching words instead of concepts. Move to second discovery. In second, Feynman discovers that students are learning definitions instead of developing understanding. He's in a class. The professor asks, what is Brewster's angle? A student immediately raises his hand, recites perfectly. Brewster's angle is the angle at which light with a particular polarization can pass through a transparent dielectric surface without any reflection. Let's show this is impressive, a perfect answer. Exactly what the textbook says. The professor is pleased. Other students are nodding. But Feynman interrupts. He asks the student, can you tell me, in your own words, what that means? The student looks confused. That's what Brewster's angle is. No, you told me the definition. But what does it mean? Can you explain it without using technical terms? Pause us, the student can't. He knows the definition perfectly. He can spell every word. He got the answer right on the test. But he has no idea what he's talking about. Fey, make the connection. He's learned the definition. But not the thing the definition is defining. He's learned the label without learning what the label points to. And this is everywhere in education. Students learn definitions. They memorize them. They repeat them on tests. And everyone thinks they've learned, but they haven't. They've just memorized arrangements of words. That's the second part of the lie, teaching definitions instead of understanding. Fey moved to third discovery, third. Feynman discovers that students are studying about science instead of doing science. He's watching a laboratory class. Students are doing an experiment about light. They have the equipment. They have instructions. They're following the procedure. But Feynman notices something. They're not observing. They're not thinking. They're not wondering. They're just following steps, like a recipe. Measure this. Record that. Calculate this. Write down the answer that matches the textbook. Rock share what he does. So Feynman asks one student, what do you see happening here? What's interesting about this? The student looks at him like he's crazy. I see the experiment working. The results match the theory. That's what's supposed to happen. But what's interesting? What surprises you? What makes you curious? Blank stare. Collart make the point devastating eye. These students aren't doing science. Science is about observing reality, asking questions, being surprised, wondering why, testing ideas. These students are performing rituals, following steps, getting the right answer. Not because they understand it, but because the textbook said that's what should happen. They're learning about science, learning the vocabulary of science, learning the appearance of science. But they're not actually doing science. They're not thinking scientifically. They're not developing scientific curiosity or reasoning. That's the third part of the lie, teaching about science instead of how to do science. As X moved to fourth discovery as in fourth. This is the most shocking one. Feynman discovers that everyone involved knows it's fake, but nobody admits it. He talks to the students privately, and they confess, "Of course, we don't really understand. We just memorize for the exams. That's how you pass." He talks to the professors, and some of them quietly admit, yes, the students don't really learn. But what can we do? This is how the system works. We have to cover the material. We have to give exams. We have to maintain standards. On to get intense offs, everyone knows. The students know they're not learning. The professors know they're not teaching. The administrators know the degrees don't mean much. But everyone keeps pretending because the alternative, admitting the whole system is broken, is too uncomfortable. So they maintain the theater. Students memorize, professors lecture, exams are passed, degrees are awarded. Everyone pretends education is happening. Pause. That's the fourth part of the lie. Everyone participating in the pretense that memorization is learning. Bring it together, so that's what Feynman discovered in Brazil. An education system that teaches words instead of concepts. Teaches definitions instead of understanding. Teaches about science instead of how to do science. And maintains a collective pretense that this is real education. Direct address hour now? Here's the uncomfortable question. Is this just a problem in Brazil in 1952? Or is this everywhere, right now? Hack answer, it's everywhere. Share modern examples. Students in American universities can recite the principles of evolution, but they can't explain why antibiotic resistance happens. They can define supply and demand, but they can't predict what happens to housing prices when interest rates change. They can recite the formulas for projectile motion, but they can't figure out the trajectory of a thrown ball. Get directed, they know the words. They pass the tests, they get the degrees. But they don't understand, they can't apply. Think same lie, same theater, same pretense. Pause. And it's not just schools. It's online courses where students watch videos and think they've learned. It's books that teach terminology instead of concepts. It's the entire modern education system. The lie Feynman discovered in Brazil, it's still here. It's everywhere, and it's affecting you. Make it personally. Think about something you tried to learn recently, maybe from a course, maybe from a book, maybe from a video. Did you find yourself memorizing terms without really understanding them? Did you find yourself being able to repeat what you heard but not apply it? Did you find yourself knowing you were supposed to understand but not really getting it? That's the lie, right there, in your own experience. You've been taught words instead of concepts, definitions instead of understanding, about things instead of how to do things, and then you felt bad about yourself. I must not be smart enough. I must not be trying hard enough. Other people get this. Why don't I? Emphatica, it's not you, it's the lie, it's the system. It's how education is structured to maintain the appearance of learning without requiring actual understanding. Shift ton. So what did Feynman do about this? What was his solution? I share his approach. At the end of his time in Brazil, Feynman gives a speech to the professors and administrators, and he tells them everything he's discovered. Everything I just told you, and he offers a solution, a way to teach that actually produces understanding instead of just memorization. He says teach by connecting to reality, always. Every concept, every principle, every formula. Explain, don't start with the definition, start with the phenomenon, the real thing, the experience. Don't teach the coefficient of kinetic friction is less than static friction. Start with pushing a heavy box. Notice how it's hard to start moving but easier to keep moving. Wonder why. Investigate, then introduce the concept. Don't teach Brewster's angle is start with sunlight reflecting off water. Notice how you see a bright reflection at certain angles. Wonder why. Investigate. Then introduce the concept to make the principle clear. Always connect to reality first. Then introduce the scientific concept as a way of understanding that reality. That way the concept has meaning. It's not just words. It's a tool for understanding something real, something you can see, something you can experience. Continue second principle. Demand explanation in simple terms. Always don't let students hide behind jargon. Don't let them recite textbook definitions. Make them explain concepts in their own words. To someone who knows nothing about the subject, if they can't do that, they don't understand. No matter how many tests they've passed. Third principle, third, teach students to think, not to memorize. Give them problems they've never seen before. Problems that require applying concepts in new ways. Problems that require reasoning, not just remembering. If they can only solve problems they've seen before, they haven't learned to think. They've just learned to pattern match. A fourth principle. Fourth, make them actually do the thing. Don't just teach about science. Make them do science, observe, question, hypothesize, test, discover. Don't just teach about writing. Make them write. Badly at first, then better. Don't just teach about programming. Make them program, debug, figure things out. I make the point doing is learning. Watching someone else do is not learning. Reading about doing is not learning. Doing is learning. Apause. Those are Feynman's principles for real education. Education that produces understanding instead of just the appearance of understanding. Address the resistance. Now, when Feynman proposed this in Brazil, you know what happened. The education establishment pushed back hard. This is too slow. We have too much material to cover. This doesn't work for standardized testing. How do we measure learning? This puts too much pressure on students. They can't handle this level of thinking. This requires too much preparation from teachers. They're already overwhelmed. You can make the point. In other words, your method requires actual learning. Our system isn't set up for that. Our system is set up for the appearance of learning, and we're not going to change. The lie was more important than the truth. The system was more important than actual education, and nothing changed. They could get direct tests, and that's still true today. The same lie, the same resistance to truth, the same prioritization of system over learning. But here's what's important: you don't need the system to change. You can change how you learn, right now. A present solution. If you're a student, stop trying to memorize. Start trying to understand. When you encounter a new concept, don't just memorize the definition. Ask, what real thing is this describing? How does this connect to my experience? Can I explain this to someone in simple terms? If you can't answer those questions, you don't understand yet. Don't move on. Stay with it until you do. Continue when you're studying. Don't just reread. Test yourself with new problems. Problems you haven't seen before. Can you apply the concept? Can you think with it? If not, you haven't learned it. No matter how many times you've reviewed your notes. Asian for teachers. If you're a teacher, start with reality. Always. Don't begin a lesson with definitions. Begin with something students can see, experience, touch, wonder about. Then introduce the concept as a way of understanding that reality. Continue. Demand explanation in simple terms. Don't accept jargon. Don't accept recitation. Make students explain concepts in their own words. To you, to each other, to their grandmother. If they can't, they don't understand. Help them get there. A for parents. If you're a parent, don't be fooled by good grades. Your child can get straight A's and understand nothing. The system rewards memorization. It doesn't require understanding, so ask different questions. Don't ask, what did you learn? Ask, can you explain this to me in simple terms? Can you show me an example? Can you apply this to something in real life? Pause. If they can't, they memorized for the test and forgot everything. They participated in the lie. Help them learn for real instead. For self-learner says. And if you're teaching yourself something, be honest about what you understand. Don't fool yourself into thinking you've learned something just because you've read about it, or watched a video about it, or completed a course about it. Test yourself. Can you explain it simply? Can you apply it to new situations? Can you use it to solve problems you haven't seen before? Make it concrete. If you're learning programming, don't just follow tutorials. Build something without a tutorial. Break things. Fix them. Actually program. If you're learning a language, don't just study grammar. Try to communicate. Make mistakes. Get corrected. Actually use the language. If you're learning anything, do the thing. Not about the thing itself. I share transformation story. Let me tell you about someone who applied this. Call her Sarah. Sarah was a biology major. Good grades. Graduated with honors. Couldn't get a job in her field because when employers interviewed her, they realized she didn't actually understand biology. She'd memorized it for tests, but she couldn't think with it, couldn't apply it, couldn't reason about it. Continue. She was devastated. 4 years of college. good grades. And she hadn't actually learned anything. Then she discovered Feynman's story. And she understood it wasn't her fault. She'd been taught the lie. She'd been taught to memorize instead of understand. So she started over, relearning biology. But this time properly. Share method. She picked one concept at a time. Let's say a natural selection, where she didn't start with the textbook definition. She started with questions. Why do some species survive and others go extinct? Why do bacteria become resistant to antibiotics? Why do dogs look so different from their wolf ancestors? She investigated, read about real examples, studied actual cases, connected the concept to reality. A-sharp continued, then she explained it, in her own words, to friends who knew nothing about biology. If they didn't understand her explanation, she revised it, made it simpler, made it clearer. Then she applied it, found new situations where natural selection might be happening, made predictions, tested them. Share result one concept at a time. Understanding deeply instead of memorizing broadly. Connecting to reality, explaining simply. Applying actively. 6 months later, she got a job. Because in interviews, she could think. She could reason. She could apply concepts. She actually understood biology. Not because she was smarter, but because she learned properly instead of learning the lie. Arsish make the broader point. That's what happens when you reject the lie. When you demand real understanding instead of accepting the appearance of understanding. You learn less material, but you understand it deeply, and that deep understanding is worth more than broad memorization. Tell final story. Let me end by telling you what happened to Feynman after Brazil. He went back to the United States, back to teaching at Caltech, and he became legendary as a teacher. The Feynman lectures on physics are still studied today, decades after his death. Why? What made him such an effective teacher? Answer, because he never taught the lie. He always taught for understanding. He started with reality, always. Every concept connected to something you could see, experience, touch, wonder about. He demanded simple explanation. If you couldn't explain it to a child, you didn't understand it. He made students think. Not memorize, not recite. Think. He made them actually do physics. Not just watch them do physics. Not just read about physics. Do it. Azaman Pazai and his students, they didn't just pass tests. They became physicists. They understood deeply. They could think with the concepts. They could apply them to new problems. They actually learned. Walk to center. So here's what I want you to take from this. Here's what matters. The education system is lying to you. It's teaching you words instead of concepts, definitions instead of understanding, about things instead of how to do things. And it's maintaining a collective pretense that this is real education. A direct challenge. But you don't have to accept the lie. You can demand real understanding from yourself, from your teachers, from your education. You can refuse to memorize without understanding. You can refuse to recite without explaining. You can refuse to study about things without doing them. Vast, make it personal. High. Think about what you're trying to learn right now. Right now. Today, are you learning words or concepts? Definitions or understanding about the thing or the thing itself? Pauses, be honest. If you're learning the lie, if you're memorizing without understanding, stop. Start over. Do it properly. Connect to reality. Explain simply. Think actively. Do the thing. It's slower. It feels less productive. It covers less material. But it produces actual learning, actual understanding, actual capability. A final statement, Feynman's shocking realization in that Brazilian classroom was this: most education is theater. It's performance. It's pretense. But learning doesn't have to be. You can learn for real. You can demand real understanding. You can reject the lie. Pause. And when you do, when you learn properly, deeply, truly, you'll discover something amazing. Learning isn't hard. It's natural. It's joyful. It's what your brain wants to do. It's only hard when you're trying to memorize instead of understand. When you're participating in the lie instead of seeking the truth. Smile, so stop participating in the lie. Start learning for real. That's what Feynman discovered. That's what he taught. That's what changed everything for him. And it can change everything for you too. Thank you. If you want to learn more about how Feynman actually taught, if you want to understand his methods for real education that produces real understanding, do me a favor. Like this video and subscribe to the Mind of Richard Feynman channel. We're exploring how to learn properly, not the lie, not the theater. Real understanding. real capability, real learning. Join us. Let's reject the lie together. See you in the next one.